Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you know someone who has trouble sleeping, feel free to share these stories with them. A few listeners have told me the videos help them relax and fall asleep. Tonight's first story comes from the Netherlands. A mother started feeling watched after her husband moved out, but she tried not to think too much about it. Then the feeling suddenly stopped for her and started happening to her daughter instead. That's when she began to wonder if it was more than fear or anxiety. Let's begin, and I hope you sleep well tonight. We've lived in this two-story house since early 2022. When we first moved in, I was still married. Then, a couple of years later, my husband left, and suddenly it was just me and the children trying to adjust to a completely different life. Even before the separation, I sometimes felt as though someone was watching me while I was lying in bed at night. It was always strongest near one particular corner of the bedroom. Back then, having my husband beside me made it easier to dismiss. I could tell myself I was imagining things, turn over, and eventually fall asleep. But after he moved out, that feeling became much more intense. Some nights, I would lie completely still, certain that something was standing in the corner and staring at me. I would grab my phone, switch on the flashlight, and shine it across the room. There was never anything there, just the wall, a chair, and the shadows from the curtains. My father passed away in 2019, so part of me wondered whether it could somehow be him. For years, I would occasionally smell the familiar scent of his old home in our downstairs hallway. It usually happened late at night when I got up for a glass of water or to use the bathroom. The smell was so specific that it would stop me in my tracks. Strangely, that began not long after we moved into this house, while I was still married. I've always struggled with anxiety surrounding things I can't see or explain. Those fears began when I was a child, although they had mostly faded as I got older. When they returned, I assumed stress had brought them back. There is also a history of mental illness on my father's side of the family, so I worried that perhaps my mind was creating something that wasn't really there. Not long after my ex-husband left, my youngest child developed an intense fear of monsters and ghosts. It became so severe that I eventually moved his mattress into my bedroom so he could sleep near me. He still gets nervous at bedtime. I sit beside him, remind him that he's safe and that I'm only a few steps away, and usually that helps him settle down. At first, I blamed the separation. I thought he was reacting to his father no longer living with us. He had also discovered frightening videos on a streaming app and would sometimes watch them while I was busy cooking or cleaning. I removed the app from the television, but his fears never completely disappeared. Then, about a week ago, something changed. The presence in my bedroom was suddenly gone. For the first time in months, I didn't feel watched. The room felt lighter and peaceful again. I honestly believed I had finally overcome my fear. I felt relieved, and even a little embarrassed that I had allowed my imagination to frighten me for so long. But last night, my oldest daughter came to speak to me. She told me that, during the past week, she had begun feeling as though something was watching her in her bedroom at night. She said the sensation was so strong that she had started dreading bedtime. Then she told me something that made my stomach drop. A few evenings earlier, she had been sitting at her desk painting her nails when she felt warm breath against the back of her neck. She turned around immediately, but no one was there. She said whatever she feels seems enormous, almost as though it is towering above her. She also described it as dark and deeply threatening. That was exactly how the presence had always felt to me. And now, I can't stop thinking about the timing. The same week I stopped feeling it in my room, she began feeling it in hers. It almost seems as though it didn't disappear. It simply moved down the hall. We have 2 cats, and neither of them behave strangely. They wander upstairs without hesitation, sleep in the bedrooms, and never stare at empty corners or react as though something is nearby. That gives me some comfort. As far as I know, no one has ever died in this house either. So, if this is something real, I worry that it may not be connected to the building at all. Maybe it is connected to our family. My mind still goes back to my father because of the familiar scent I used to notice downstairs. But my father loved us. I can't understand why his presence would feel so frightening, or why he would ever want to terrify his grandchildren. I'm trying to remain calm for the children, but the truth is that I'm scared too. I don't know whether we are dealing with grief, anxiety, shared fears, or something that none of us can explain. We live in the Netherlands, and I would be deeply grateful for any thoughtful advice about what steps I should take next. Thank you for listening. So, I was talking with my mom recently about some of the strange things our family has experienced over the years, and she told me a story I'd never heard before. When she was about 23, she was living in a quiet town in southern Poland. She rented a tiny apartment above the bakery where she worked during the day. It was one of those places where everyone knew each other, and people rarely bothered locking their doors. One night, she woke up suddenly and noticed someone standing in her bedroom doorway. At first, she thought it was her landlady's nephew, Marek, who occasionally stayed in the apartment next door. She called his name, but the figure didn't answer. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she realized it didn't look quite human. It was extremely tall, probably close to 7 feet, and completely black, with no visible face or features. It seemed to be wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat. Then it slowly moved toward her bed. Was unlike anything she had ever felt. It wasn't normal fear. It felt heavy, almost as though it had filled the entire room. She pulled the blankets over her head and started praying quietly. After a while, the fear faded, and somehow she fell asleep again. She never looked out from under the covers to see whether the figure was still there. The next morning, everything looked normal. She spoke with her landlady, who confirmed that Marek hadn't visited and no one else had entered the building. The outside doors had remained shut all night. Years later, when my older brother was around 16, he woke up after a nightmare and saw a tall shadow figure standing beside his bed. He described the same long coat, the same wide-brimmed hat, and the same blank darkness where its face should have been. He screamed for my mom. She rushed into the room, but by then, the figure had disappeared. What unsettled her most was that she had never told him about her own experience. There was no reason he should have been able to describe the figure so perfectly. Then, a few years ago, it happened to me. I woke up during the night, rolled over, and noticed something standing near the foot of my bed. It was the same figure. Tall, completely dark, wearing what looked like a long coat and a wide hat. But strangely, I wasn't afraid. I actually said, "Hello? Who are you?" It didn't respond. It wasn't facing me directly either. It stood slightly turned to the side, completely motionless. I blinked several times and rubbed my eyes because I assumed I was half asleep and imagining it. But every time I looked again, it was still there. Eventually, since it wasn't moving or giving me a bad feeling, I closed my eyes and went back to sleep. Sometime later, I woke up again. It was still dark outside, and the figure was still standing in exactly the same place. I spoke to it again, but nothing happened. It didn't move. It didn't turn toward me. It didn't disappear. It simply stood there. I fell asleep again, and by the time I woke up in the morning, it was gone. I've experienced plenty of unusual things throughout my life. Some of them gave me an immediate sense that something was wrong, but this figure didn't. It felt strange, of course, but not threatening. That's the part I still don't understand. Why did my mom and brother feel such overwhelming fear while I felt almost completely calm? Was it some kind of spirit connected to our family? Something that has followed us across generations? Or were we all experiencing similar sleep-related hallucinations without realizing it? Maybe it really was just the family sleep paralysis visitor making another appearance. Still, 3 people in the same family seeing almost exactly the same figure years apart feels difficult to dismiss. So I'm curious, has anyone else experienced something like this? And what do you think it might have been? A few years ago, I visited the Tower of London for the first time. I had been in historic places that felt unusually heavy before, but this was my first experience of somewhere like that with my assistant's dog, Boyden. Boyden is a friendly, confident Labrador. He has traveled all over the UK since he was a puppy, visited countless museums and historic buildings, and even accompanied me abroad. He is calm, dependable, and not an anxious dog at all. That is why his reaction inside the Bloody Tower unsettled me so deeply. We entered the room associated with the 2 young princes, Edward V and his brother Richard, who were confined in the tower before disappearing in 1483. Almost immediately, Boyden lowered himself close to the floor. His hackles rose, and he fixed his eyes on one particular corner. Then he began to growl. It was not a sound I had ever heard from him before. It was so low that it seemed to vibrate through his entire body. At the same moment, I felt an intense cold settle over me. It was late autumn, but the day itself had been fairly mild. This was different from ordinary cold. It felt as though it had reached right into my bones, leaving me with the strange certainty that I would never feel warm again. We did not remain in that room. Nearby, there was a blocked spiral staircase leading upward. Boyden reacted to that too, but in a completely different way. He looked up the stairs, began wagging his tail, and tried to move toward them as though someone familiar were waiting above. I could not see or hear anyone. Still, whatever oppressive feeling had filled the room was absent near those stairs. The atmosphere there felt lighter, almost welcoming. Once we stepped outside, Boyden returned to his usual self. He was calm, attentive, and completely focused on his work. I began to wonder whether I had allowed the history of the place to affect my imagination. Then we reached a particular section of the courtyard. We had stopped to speak with one of the yeoman warders when Boyden suddenly turned away from us. His body became rigid. His hackles rose again, and he stared into an empty patch of courtyard, growling at something none of us could see. There were no tourists standing there. No birds. No movement at all. The warden noticed his reaction and told me that his own dog behaved the same way in that exact spot during nighttime rounds. Apparently, several of the guards' dogs refused to cross that area. The tower's ravens, other birds, and even the resident cats were also known to avoid it. He asked whether Boyden had reacted inside the Bloody Tower. When I said yes, he did not seem surprised. I cannot say which of the tower's many tragedies Boyden sensed that day. I only know that his reactions were completely unlike his normal behavior, and I have never doubted that he experienced something there. The only other place where he responded so strongly was Durham Cathedral. Most of the cathedral did not trouble him. In fact, shortly after we entered, we passed through a peaceful cloistered walkway where the atmosphere felt warm, gentle, and deeply comforting. Boyden stopped there, wagged his tail, and sat as though greeting someone. There was nobody visible nearby, and I eventually had to encourage him to continue. Later, as we approached an old Jacobean cabinet, everything changed. The cabinet survived from a period when more than 1,700 Scottish prisoners of war were held in terrible conditions nearby. Many died from disease and malnutrition during the 17th century. As we drew closer, Bwyden became extremely distressed. He did not merely hesitate. He made it unmistakably clear that he could not remain there, so we left that part of the cathedral immediately. I know people will interpret experiences like these in different ways. Some may believe dogs notice sounds, scents, or movements that humans simply miss. Others may believe they sense something beyond our understanding. I cannot prove what Bwyden encountered in those places, but I knew my dog. I knew his confidence, his training, and every small change in his behavior. Whatever was there, he felt it. I still think about this story sometimes, especially late at night when everything is quiet. It happened a few summers ago when I was 15. My family owned a tiny cottage outside the city. Calling it a cottage might be generous. It was really an old wooden cabin with no heating, unfinished walls, and a permanent smell of dust, pine boards, and damp earth. My dad bought it so we could escape the city on weekends, cook outside, and spend time together. Everyone else saw it as a cramped little place in the countryside, but I loved it. Mostly because of the attic. The attic was barely a room. There was an old mattress, a few boxes, some rusty tools, and a single electrical outlet beside the wall. But to me, it felt like my own private universe. I would lie up there for hours, listening to music, scrolling through my phone, or staring at the wooden ceiling while my thoughts wandered. The first time I saw him, the cabin was packed with people. My father had gone back to the city for work, but my mother, younger sister, aunt, cousin, and one of my friends were staying overnight. There was hardly enough room for everyone. Blankets covered the floor, bags were piled against the walls, and people were sleeping wherever they could find space. I had managed to claim a narrow bed in the corner. It was sometime after 3 in the morning. The room was hot and completely dark. Everyone else was asleep, but I was still awake with my headphones on. My phone battery was almost dead, so I took off my headphones and reached toward the charger. That was when I saw him. There was a figure standing near the front door. He was impossibly tall, perhaps 7.5 feet, and his entire body was pale white. Not white like clothing or skin. He looked as though he had been formed from fog illuminated by moonlight. Our ceiling was low, so his neck was bent at an awkward angle. His head leaned toward one shoulder, and he was staring directly at my little sister. For a few seconds, I honestly thought my tired eyes were playing a trick on me. I grabbed my phone, switched on the flashlight, and pointed it at him. He remained exactly where he was. The light passed across his body, but he did not disappear. His outline was clear, yet parts of him seemed to shimmer and pulse, almost like smoke trying to hold the shape of a person. I was terrified. My hands were shaking, and every instinct told me to wake everyone and hide under the blanket. But I had always been fascinated by strange stories and unexplained things. Part of me had spent years wondering what I would do if I ever saw something supernatural. Now something was standing only a few steps away. So, for reasons I still cannot fully explain, I got out of bed and walked toward him. Each step felt heavier than the last. My knees were weak, and my heartbeat was so loud that I thought it might wake the others. When I came close, I heard breathing. It was quiet and uneven, a thin, rattling breath that sounded painful, as though every inhale required enormous effort. A chill ran through my whole body. Then the figure dissolved. There was no flash, no sudden movement, and no sound. One moment he was standing in front of me, and the next he simply faded into the darkness. I even went outside to search for him. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but my thinking was strangely calm. He had looked transparent, so I convinced myself he probably could not physically hurt me. I checked the yard, the trees, the fence, and the small garden behind the cabin. There was nothing there. Only the wind moving through the leaves and the steady sound of insects in the grass. The next morning, I told no one. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, wondering whether I had dreamed it. Later, I quietly told my friend. He listened, but I could tell he did not believe me. That evening, while everyone was eating, I suddenly said, "There was a huge white man standing by the door last night." The entire table went silent. I described what I had seen, including the way he had been watching my sister. My mother nearly dropped her cup. My sister turned pale and started crying. That night, she refused to sleep alone. For the next several evenings, I walked around the property searching for the figure. I looked behind the storage shed, beside the fence, between the trees, and inside an abandoned wash house nearby. I never found him. Eventually, I convinced myself that it had been a waking dream brought on by exhaustion and the summer heat. Then, a few weeks later, we saw him again. My mother, my sister, my friend, and I had gone for a late-night walk through an abandoned holiday village nearby. The place was filled with collapsing cottages, broken windows, tangled vines, and gardens that had grown wild. On our way home, a white figure appeared on the path ahead of us. It was the same height and the same pale, mist-like shape. This time, everyone saw him. My mother stopped walking. My sister gripped my arm and began to cry. My friend covered his face with both hands, but I felt something completely different. I was relieved. I had not imagined him. He was real, or at least real enough for the others to see. There was no other path home, so we continued forward. Before we reached the figure, several dogs suddenly rushed out from behind him, barking and snapping. My mother grabbed a fallen branch and began waving it at them, shouting until they backed away. While everyone was focused on the dogs, I kept watching the white figure. He faded from the path without taking a single step. That night, after we returned to the cabin, I heard the breathing again. Everyone around me was asleep, and I could hear their ordinary breathing clearly. This sound was different. It was weaker, rougher, and much closer, as though someone were standing beside my bed. I stared into the darkness, but I could not see him. Strangely, I was no longer frightened. The sound almost made me feel protected, as though he had followed us home to make sure we were safe. The following evening, several neighborhood children came to visit. They were running around the yard, shouting and playing games while I hid in the attic for some peace and quiet. Suddenly, the yard became silent. Then my sister screamed. I ran downstairs and found her sitting on the ground, shaking. She said she had turned the corner of the cabin and nearly collided with the tall, white figure. "He looked down at me," she kept saying. "He was right there." I ran around the corner and called out, asking him to wait. There was no one there. After that, I did not see him again for the rest of the summer. The following year, I spent most of my vacation living alone at the cottage. I brought an old computer and a pair of speakers and spent my days making music. It should have felt peaceful, but I was constantly aware of something nearby. Sometimes I felt watched from the corners of rooms. Other times, I thought I heard someone walking behind me. I would turn around and find nothing there. Then, one night, I stepped outside to use the little wooden bathroom behind the cabin. As I crossed the yard, I happened to glance up at the attic window. The light inside was glowing a dull amber. And there he was. The tall white figure stood behind the glass, looking down at me. Then he slowly raised one hand and waved. It was not threatening. He was not warning me or asking me to come closer. It looked like the simple wave of someone greeting an old friend. My heart jumped, and I hurried back into the cabin. I climbed the attic stairs and called out, "I'm here! I saw you!" but the attic was empty. After that night, I began hearing footsteps above me whenever I slept downstairs. The floorboards would creak slowly, usually sometime before dawn, followed by that familiar, fragile breathing. One night, I finally whispered into the darkness, "I don't know who you are, but you've never hurt me. We can be friends." I felt a little foolish saying it, but I meant it. Not long afterward, I fell asleep on the attic floor with my phone in my hand. I woke in that strange space between sleeping and waking and realized I could not move. Near my feet, I saw two long, pale legs. Then I heard footsteps circling me. I knew I was alone in the cabin, but I did not feel afraid. It felt as though he had come to check on me one final time. When I could move again, the attic was empty. After that morning, everything stopped. No footsteps. No breathing. No pale figure watching from a doorway or window. The next summer, I returned to the cottage and stayed there for several weeks. I waited for some sign of him, but none ever came. And honestly, I missed him. I know there may be logical explanations for some of what happened. Exhaustion, shadows, fear, or sleep paralysis could explain certain moments. But they cannot explain why my family and my friend saw him too. Even now, I wonder who he was and why he kept returning. Maybe he belonged to that land. Maybe he was connected to the old cabin. Maybe he was simply lonely. Whatever the truth is, I never felt that he wanted to harm us. By the end, he no longer felt like a haunting. He felt like a quiet stranger who had slowly become my friend. Hi. So, there's someone in my family, or perhaps something, that I've been trying to understand for years. We call him Oscar. He's been connected to my mom's side of the family for generations. I'm not certain whether the stories began with my grandfather's family or my grandmother's, but my mom remembers hearing older relatives talk about him. For all I know, he may have been around long before any of them. Whenever something goes missing in our family, we ask Oscar to help us find it. Sometimes, of course, we've simply misplaced the thing ourselves. But other times, it feels as though Oscar has deliberately hidden it for a bit of fun. He seems especially fond of small, important objects, keys, spectacles, pens, jewelry, that sort of thing. There's a particular way you have to ask him for help. You must be polite, explain clearly what you're looking for, and then stop searching. That last part matters. Once you've genuinely given up, the missing object will often appear somewhere absurdly obvious, perhaps in the center of an empty table. Other times, it turns up somewhere that makes absolutely no sense, like inside a cupboard, beside the washing powder, or even in the refrigerator. On rare occasions, things have reappeared many miles from where they were lost. Now, it would be easy to blame all of this on forgetfulness. Quite a few people in my family have ADHD, myself included, so we're perfectly capable of losing things without any supernatural assistance. But there have been incidents that other people witnessed, and none of us have ever been able to explain. Once, I left my glasses at home and later found them inside a locker at college. My mom lost a spare car key while staying in a rented cottage in North Wales. Before she had even returned home, the key appeared on the mantelpiece at her parents' house in Lincolnshire. One of my uncles once lost a single boot in his own home. It eventually turned up in the greenhouse, 2 gardens away. The most memorable experience I've had with Oscar happened one Christmas. I traveled about 150 miles to stay with relatives for several weeks. As well as spending Christmas with everyone, I had arranged my assistant's dog's yearly training and assessment, so I had packed for quite a long visit. I brought all the family presents with me and wrapped them in the spare bedroom. The day before Christmas, my cousins and I counted every gift to make sure nobody had been forgotten. They were already wrapped, but the numbers matched perfectly. Then Christmas morning arrived, and the present for my cousin's wife had vanished. It was definitely there the previous day. My cousin had seen it himself. We searched the spare room, the living room, and the hallway, but there was no sign of it. Eventually, we decided it must have disappeared somewhere in the general chaos of Christmas and would probably turn up once the decorations came down. A few days later, I drove home. I was exhausted when I arrived, so I left my bag sitting unopened in the kitchen. Then I walked into the living room and looked beneath my own Christmas tree. There was one item under it: the missing present. The same present I had wrapped at my relative's house, 150 miles away. I stood there staring at it for a long moment. Then I thanked Oscar very politely and called my family to tell them where it had appeared. More recently, I lost my glasses after taking an afternoon nap. I'm extremely short-sighted, so without them, I can barely function. I always leave them on the desk beside my bed. I do have a cat, so occasionally they get knocked onto the floor, but I checked everywhere. The desk, the carpet, under the bed, behind the bedside cabinet, around the cat tree. Nothing. I even video called a friend and asked them to help me search by directing the camera around the room. Listen, nothing. Eventually, I asked Oscar for help. I praised his talent, promised I would be grateful, and then stopped looking. For the next couple of hours, I lay on the bed watching videos with my phone held only a few centimeters from my face. When I finally searched again, I suddenly felt the urge to check the top of my sewing machine. Sitting there was a pair of dress shoes. My glasses were tucked neatly inside the toes. They were nowhere near the bed or the desk, and there was no sensible way they could have fallen into the shoes. Naturally, I thanked Oscar. You always thank him. According to our family tradition, failing to do so means exactly 3 more objects will disappear. Always 3. And those items may not be returned, no matter how politely you ask. That's why I keep wondering what Oscar actually is. He seems attached to the family rather than to a particular house. Months may pass without anything happening, and then someone will call to say he has suddenly become very active around them. He doesn't seem cruel. He can be helpful, and sometimes his strange interventions feel almost lucky. But he is playful, proud, and easily offended when people mock or disrespect him. My mother's family is scattered across northern England and Wales. There are old stories of Irish ancestry, mining communities, and even a distant foundling who may have come from a traveling family centuries ago. Whether any of that has something to do with Oscar, I honestly don't know. All I know is that he has followed our family for generations. And whenever something disappears, we ask him nicely. Then we stop looking. Today, I want to tell you about something that has happened in my house for years, and honestly, I still don't know how to explain it. Some people believe we're dealing with ghosts. Others have suggested duendes. I'm not completely convinced by either explanation, but after everything my family and I have experienced, I can't pretend it's all normal. Our house is fairly new. My family was the first to live here, so there aren't any stories about previous owners or anything like that. Still, strange things began happening not long after we moved in. My dad noticed them first. Late at night, he would hear something fall downstairs, almost like a heavy object had been knocked off a table. But when he checked in the morning, nothing was on the floor. Everything would be exactly where we had left it. A few months later, I began hearing noises too. Mine were different. I would hear slow footsteps moving across the roof directly above my bedroom. Because we live in central Mexico, my first thought was that someone had climbed onto the house. I would lie completely still, listening carefully, trying to figure out where the footsteps were going. But whenever we checked outside, there was never anyone there. The strange part was that I never heard the sounds my dad described, and he never seemed to hear the footsteps above my room. However, our security cameras occasionally recorded loud knocks and scraping noises when everyone was asleep. The cameras also captured small, glowing shapes drifting across the screen. They looked like floating orbs, although I know dust and insects can sometimes appear that way on night vision cameras. There were other sounds too. Sometimes we heard someone whistling softly near the hallway. Other times, it sounded like bare feet walking from one room to another. Eventually, everything became quiet, and we started to believe it was over. I've never considered myself especially sensitive to paranormal things. Other members of my family are, and they have many strange stories of their own. I've always been the person searching for a practical explanation. Then, the door started moving. One afternoon, my partner and I were sitting downstairs when we noticed the door to a storage room slowly swinging back and forth. At first, I assumed my dad had gone inside. I called upstairs and asked him, but he said he hadn't been near the room. Both of my parents were on the second floor, which meant my partner and I were the only people downstairs. My partner immediately became nervous. He thought someone might have entered the house. When we told my dad, he calmly came downstairs, looked inside the room, closed the door, and returned upstairs. He barely reacted. By then, he had already experienced enough strange things in the house that a moving door didn't seem to surprise him. My partner, on the other hand, couldn't stop staring at it. Several weeks later, I came downstairs while I was home alone and found the same door wide open. I checked the security footage. The recording showed my parents leaving earlier that day while I remained in my bedroom. Nobody entered the house afterward. At some point between their departure and the moment I came downstairs, the door had slowly opened by itself. The camera recorded the entire thing. But the strangest incident happened one evening when my partner and I were completely alone. For some reason, he kept telling me that he could feel someone else inside the house. I tried to reassure him. I had watched my parents leave. The doors were locked, and there was no reason to believe anyone else was there. Then we saw the storage room door open. This time, we walked toward it together. As we stood in front of the doorway, the door began moving again. It slowly opened, paused, and then drifted toward the frame. My partner checked the windows and tried to see whether a draft could be causing it. Then he looked at me and said, "I could understand the wind pushing it open, but how would the wind pull it closed?" We stood there watching as the door opened and closed several times. The movement was weak and uneven, almost as though someone on the other side was trying to shut it but couldn't quite manage it. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the entire house. Neither of us touched it. That wasn't the only thing caught on camera. One night, a large sack filled with dried corn suddenly tipped over in the kitchen. There were no animals nearby, no open windows, and nothing appeared to touch it. There's also a spare room that hardly anyone enters. Whenever we go inside, we sometimes find thin marks in the dust, almost like fingers had been dragged slowly across the furniture. Small objects occasionally appear in different places. Nothing disappears completely, but things are moved just enough for us to notice. Once, we found several fingerprints on a glass cabinet that had recently been cleaned. On another glass panel, there was what looked like the outline of an entire hand. No one in the family admitted touching either one. People who have heard these stories often tell me that duendes like to move objects, make noises, and play tricks inside homes. Others believe the house may have some kind of spiritual presence. I honestly don't know what to believe. Maybe every incident has a reasonable explanation that we simply haven't discovered yet. But when I think about the footsteps, the recordings, the handprints, and that door opening and closing right in front of us, it becomes harder to dismiss everything as coincidence. Nothing has ever physically harmed us, but I still wonder whether these events are harmless or whether we should be more careful. So, what do you think is happening in this house? Would you be concerned, or would you simply learn to live with it? I still find myself wondering whether the tiny house my husband and I lived in carried some kind of negative energy, because during the months we were there, our relationship changed in ways I still can't fully explain. About 2 years ago, we moved into this little house while we were saving money and trying to get ourselves into a better financial position. It wasn't meant to be permanent, just a quiet place where we could regroup before finding a larger home. At first, we genuinely loved it. The house was small, but it felt warm and comfortable. We made the space our own, and for the first few months, we were really happy there. It felt peaceful. Then little things started happening. Objects would show up in places neither of us remembered leaving them. A mug might move from the kitchen counter to the windowsill, or the television remote would appear in a room we hadn't used all day. We knew it was strange, but we tried not to take it seriously. We would laugh and say, "It's probably just our friendly ghost." But after a while, it stopped feeling friendly. We both began noticing shadows moving at the edges of our vision. I would see something pass through a doorway, turn to look, and find nothing there. My husband started experiencing the same thing, although neither of us wanted to admit how uncomfortable it made us. One morning, we woke up and found every kitchen cabinet standing wide open. I immediately blamed my husband because I thought he was trying to scare me. He kept insisting that he hadn't touched them. At the time, I honestly didn't believe him. Not long after that, the arguments began. We would be having a completely normal evening, and then, suddenly one of us would become irritated. Most of the time, it was me starting the fight. And when I think back on those arguments now, I can barely understand why they happened. The smallest things would set me off. A dish left in the sink. A light left on. The tone of his voice when he answered a question. Things that normally wouldn't have mattered suddenly felt enormous. It became a pattern. Almost every week, we had another exhausting argument. We were both constantly tense, tired, and emotionally drained. At one point, we even talked seriously about separating. Thankfully, we decided not to give up on each other. One night, after another pointless fight, I stayed in the living room while my husband went into the bedroom. It was late, and the house was completely dark except for the flickering light from the television. I was sitting on the couch when I suddenly felt someone standing beside me. The feeling was so strong that I assumed my husband had come back into the room. I turned to speak to him, but instead, I saw a tall, dark figure standing just a few feet away. It didn't have a face. It was simply this solid black shape, almost as tall as the doorway, standing perfectly still and watching me. I jumped, and in the instant it took me to blink, it disappeared. I ran into the bedroom and told my husband what I had seen. Before I could describe it properly, he looked at me and asked, "Was it tall? Like a black shadow shaped like a person?" My stomach dropped. He told me he had seen the exact same figure near the hallway several weeks earlier. He hadn't mentioned it because he didn't want to frighten me or make the situation feel more real. We moved out the following spring. Since moving into our current home, everything has been different. The atmosphere feels lighter, and my husband and I hardly ever argue. Of course, we still disagree sometimes, but it feels normal and manageable. Nothing like the constant anger and tension we experienced in that tiny house. Honestly, I can't remember the last time we had a serious fight. I still experience sleep paralysis occasionally, and sometimes I see unsettling things during those episodes, but that has happened to me for years. Outside of that, our new home has been completely peaceful. I don't know whether something in the tiny house was affecting us, or whether the stress of our situation simply brought out the worst in both of us. But there is one detail that still bothers me. The couple who moved into the house after us separated less than a year later. From what we heard, their relationship ended badly, and they no longer speak to each other. Maybe it was only a coincidence. Still, whenever I think about that house, I remember how quickly we changed after moving in, and how quickly we became ourselves again after leaving. And part of me will always wonder whether we were really alone in there. Hey, I want to share some stories with you. Stories about things that happened to me and others. Things that don't quite fit into everyday explanations. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, and I'll tell you what I experienced, saw, or felt. These aren't just ghost stories, they're real moments that stuck with me. Moments where the line between this world and something else just blurred. Let's start with a story from when I was about 7 or 8 years old. Back then, my mom and I were living in a women's shelter, a place meant to be safe, but sometimes safety feels fragile, you know? There was this locked door and an office area with cameras monitoring the spaces, including the kitchen. Being a curious kid, I often found myself watching these monitors, fascinated by the little screens showing parts of the shelter. One night, as I was glancing at the monitors, something caught my eye. A woman standing right in front of the kitchen camera, blocking the entire view. She wasn't like any person I'd seen. She had no eyes, just empty sockets, and her hair was pulled back tightly. I couldn't make out much else, but the feeling she gave me was pure terror. It was like she knew I was watching. I told my mom, but she couldn't see anything, just the empty kitchen. She said maybe it was a trick of the light or my imagination. I wanted to believe her, so I tried to forget about it. But then, just before the shelter door unlocked to let us in, that kitchen camera went static, full fuzz, no image at all. When it cleared, the woman was gone, and the kitchen was empty. The camera was mounted high, showing the whole room. No one else saw her. 7 cameras, but only I saw this figure. It made my mom worried, and honestly, it still makes me wonder, why me? I was just a kid, nothing special. Why would something like that want to scare me? Fast forward a few years. Almost 2 years ago, my partner and I moved into our first apartment. It's a cozy spot, quiet, away from the hustle and bustle, with neighbors we hardly ever hear. The walls are thick concrete, so the silence is almost complete. But every couple of months, something strange happens. Little oddities that we can't explain. One night, my friend was staying over while my partner was working a long EMS shift. She woke me up the next morning, telling me she was startled by a deep growling noise in the middle of the night. She felt something heavy pressing on her chest and was sweating like crazy. I tried to brush it off. We'd eaten junk food and had some wine, but she was serious about it. She never stayed over again. We set up security cameras, hoping to catch anything weird. One early morning, a card from a shelf suddenly fell. If you turn the volume up on the footage, you can actually hear the card hit the shelf and then fall to the floor. We tried to recreate it countless times, but nothing. Another night, the living room nightlight went off at 4:45 a.m. Could be coincidence, but it felt odd. Then one morning, my gym bag just flipped over by itself. It hadn't been touched for a week. We even burned sage to cleanse the space, which seemed to calm things down a bit. But strange noises still happen. Knocking, things falling with no explanation, lights flickering. Once, as my friend and I came back from a walk, a notepad fell off the fridge. The camera showed a pillow fall on the couch first, then the notepad. 2 odd events happening close together. It feels like something here likes to startle us. Now, about a ghost dog. This one's strange. Back in 2017, I was hanging out with a friend, playing video games late into the night. My grandpa had told us to go to sleep, and my friend, scared of Grandpa, did just that. I decided to try staying awake. Around 3 a.m., I looked over and saw a figure on the back of a pink velvet couch. A dog, but not like any dog. It was a skeleton, big and imposing, eyes glowing red, with black smoke curling off its body. The room around me seemed muted, with grays and static, like the colors were fading. I wasn't scared, just curious and oddly calm. It vanished after a blink. The next morning, my friend woke up embarrassed. She'd wet the bed, something she'd never done before. Was it a coincidence? Maybe, but I don't think so. A few weeks ago, something happened after my aunt passed away. She was mentally handicapped and had been declining for a while. We were with her until the end. After her passing, lights in my house started flickering, lamps turning on and off by themselves. My mom experienced the same in her place. I checked the lamps, but nothing was wrong. I didn't see anything, but the feeling was there. It was different from when my grandmother died. Then, nothing happened. This time, it felt like a presence. A warning, maybe. I don't know if it's connected to a World War II relic I have. A helmet with real blood in it that carries a heavy energy. But I've had it for years without issues. Still, now I'm watching closely, waiting, observing. When I was little, I also encountered a shadow figure on my wall. A tall man with a hat, dark and silent. It appeared every sunset, and I was terrified. My parents thought I was making it up or being scared for attention. The tapping on the wall every night, the outline of the figure, it was real. Finally, someone gave me holy water, and when I sprinkled it on the wall, the presence vanished that same day. But now, years later, I hear tapping again in a new house. It follows me around, bedroom, kitchen, living room, always at night. When I try to record it or mention it, it stops. It's like it wants my attention but disappears when confronted. One night, I recorded a video where I knocked on the wall, and it knocked back, mimicking my exact rhythm. It made my stomach turn. I'm not in danger yet, but I want this gone for my family's sake. Once, I had 2 little dolls from a yard sale, both missing the same leg. We joked they were haunted. After buying them, it suddenly hailed while the sun shone. Strange weather for our area. That night, my fiancé had a nightmare where the smaller doll told him to kill me. A friend's mom came over and couldn't even hold the doll. The energy was overwhelming. When I picked it up, a high sensation rose through my body, choking me and making me sob uncontrollably. I had to put it down. After that, 5 crows appeared on the balcony, screeching loudly. A paranormal team came to bless the dolls and the apartment. The air felt heavy. The neighbor's dog howled non-stop. The team's protective stone heated up in their hands. Later, someone pointed out a little boy's face in the doll's eye in a photo. It was chilling. Not all my encounters are terrifying, though. Some are low-grade scary, like knocking sounds in my childhood bedroom that stopped when I called for my mom, or scratching on my pillow in college that no one else could explain. Once, during sleep paralysis, I felt chains dragging and pressure lifting me. When I prayed, warmth replaced fear and the presence faded. In a house built in the 1940s on 5 acres of woods, my boyfriend and I have heard a woman talking and laughing when no one is there. His dad saw shadow figures. My boyfriend, usually skeptical, heard laughter and saw a figure cross the kitchen. We're not scared. It feels like a friendly presence. Maybe the lady of the house. When I was 10, visiting family in a small Minnesota town, I shared a bed with my stepdad. One night, I woke up feeling crushed, like being trapped under hard plastic, hearing a creaking sound. I couldn't move properly and was terrified. My stepdad thought it was a bad dream. It only eased when I left the basement. To this day, that memory makes me uneasy. Growing up in a haunted house, I tried to convince myself nothing was happening. But one night, my dog barked hysterically at something invisible. I felt hands squeeze my legs through the blanket. I saw clear handprints on the covers. The fear was overwhelming. We had a peeping Tom leaving prints on windows and a ladder against my window multiple times. I think these events were connected somehow. After moving out, no more incidents occurred where I live now. Once, my grandma died when I was young. She had been my caretaker, and losing her was devastating. We moved into her house to care for my great-grandma. One Christmas, missing her terribly, I spoke to her silently in my room. Suddenly, pots and pans clashed in the kitchen, but nothing was out of place. Then, the whole house filled with the smell of freshly baked brownies and cookies, her signature scents. My mom came home and noticed the smell too. I believe it was her, coming back to comfort me. In my house, an entity has followed me for decades. Footsteps, lights turning on, faucets running. The activity quieted down but flared up again recently. One night, I found baby keys lying on the basement floor, though my kids' toys were stored safely on high shelves. The kids are afraid to go downstairs alone. The keys' appearance feels like a message that the presence is still here. At 12, I played a game similar to a Ouija board with my mom and friend. The glass moved on its own, and I began to believe in spirits. That night, I sleepwalked, waking up on my friend's bed, beating the door that was closed in a dream. Later, I experienced apparitions, translucent figures, objects flying silently, and waking to see dorm mates dissolve before my eyes. It was terrifying, but I never told anyone, fearing disbelief. One night, at around 3 a.m., I heard odd whistling outside my window. Not bird calls, not any sound I could explain. My parents were asleep. I'm not on medication or hallucinating. I felt a chill, a gut feeling warning me not to look. I stayed in bed, heart pounding, unsure of what I heard. It was eerie, and I'm still trying to understand it. Living with my family in a small apartment, my siblings share a divided room. One day, I saw a large silhouette of a woman looking through my sister's window into my brother's room. The figure disappeared when I noticed it. When I pressed my ear to my brother's door, I heard raspy, labored breathing, like someone struggling for air. The window is over 6 feet high, so whoever or whatever it was had to be unnaturally tall and hunched. I avoid that room now. At a nursing home where I worked, a call light went off in a patient's room, but she was at activities. Walking down the hall, I saw a faceless shadow standing in front of the room. It moved into the room, disappearing around the corner. I was shaken but didn't tell anyone until a coworker mentioned similar sightings. The night my great-grandmother passed, I dreamt I visited her in her nursing home. She looked healthy, hugged me warmly, and reassured me everything was okay. We laughed and talked for what felt like hours before I woke. That dream brought me comfort during a tough time. Back in 2016-2017, my friends and I explored a local haunted spot, a road with old bridges and a creepy church with a cemetery dating back centuries. We felt heavy, dark energy. One friend began seeing a tar lady afterward. We tried cleansing rituals, but I ended up physically ill. Later, a pagan friend told us the church wasn't on hallowed ground and suspected dark practices. My friend made a pact with a demon lord for protection, and his behavior changed, speaking in a different voice, knowing secrets no one else did. It was terrifying. Finally, a story from long ago, from my family. An old lady left cookbooks to a cousin named Alma. but she took some books meant for others. Strange things began. Knocks in the walls, silverware moving, voices saying, "Cook, cook, cook." Alma suffered hair pulling and disturbances. My baby room, where I slept, was a sanctuary. The entity never entered. Eventually, the stolen books were returned, and the activity stopped. My mom tried recipes from the stolen books before knowing they were taken. The food always turned out wrong, like pickles becoming jelly-like. So these are some of the moments, some scary, some comforting, but all real to me. They remind me that there's more to this world than meets the eye, and sometimes the past reaches out to the present in whispers and shadows. Thanks for listening. Hey, I hope you're ready to hear something a bit personal. Something that's been eating at me for years, and maybe sharing it out loud will help me make sense of it all. So, this goes back about 4 years, when I was around 11 years old. It's about the day I found out my mom had passed away. But honestly, the whole experience has left me questioning my own mind ever since. Let me set the scene for you. It was a weekend, a Saturday to be exact. My older sister, let's call her Anna, who was about 28 then, and I went to visit my mom as we usually did. Nothing unusual there. It was part of our routine. We'd spend some time with Mom and then head back to Anna's place for the night. That was normal because after we moved about 9 years ago, half an hour away from Mom, I'd visit every weekend. I'd always hang out with Mom, Anna, and my nieces and nephews. So that day felt like any other. But from the moment I stepped into Mom's house after coming from the hospital, a strange feeling hit me. It was like this heavy weight settled in my stomach, sickening really, and it stayed with me until I learned what had happened. I didn't know exactly when Mom died. It was either late Saturday night, maybe around 9 or 10 p.m., or early Sunday morning between midnight and 3 a.m. But something about that day felt off. Later, that night at Anna's, I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing and turning, feeling this awful nausea that just wouldn't quit. I was so queasy I tried to make myself throw up just to get relief. On top of that, I had these pounding headaches and lightheadedness that made me dizzy every time I closed my eyes. I thought maybe I was coming down with a cold, so I tried to brush it off. But then came the nightmares. They were relentless, cutting through the night like sharp blades. In these dreams, I saw Mom dying over and over again. Each time, she'd try to say something to me, words I couldn't quite catch, and then I'd jolt awake, heart hammering, only to fall back into the nightmare again. It was exhausting and terrifying. I kept telling myself, "It's okay, I'll see her tomorrow, everything will be fine." But of course, tomorrow never came that way. Instead, I woke up to my dad standing at the door, telling me the terrible news. Oddly, I felt almost like I was expecting it, even though the day before, Mom seemed fine. That contradiction haunted me. Now, here's where it gets even more unsettling. Ever since that day, I can't help but wonder if I'm losing my mind. Strange things have been happening that I just can't explain. I can't bear to be alone in the house anymore because it feels like something else is there with me. Something watching, lurking in the shadows. There are times when I see things flicker at the edge of my vision, shadowy shapes that vanish when I turn to look. My dog, usually calm and loyal, now stands stiff beside me, barking and growling at empty spaces. It's like he senses something I can't see. And then there are the weird noises, random creaks and whispers that make my skin crawl. One door in particular, the one leading to the basement, keeps opening on its own. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or a loose latch, natural explanations. But lately, I'm not so sure. Sometimes the security lights outside flash on and off without any movement or animal triggering them. I live out in the countryside, so I thought maybe a cat or a fox was playing around. but every time I check, there's nothing there. All of this has gotten worse, and honestly, I don't know what to do. I'm scared, confused, and feeling more alone than ever. I've never told anyone this before because I'm afraid they'll think I'm losing it, that I'm going crazy. But if you're hearing this, if you can offer any kind of explanation or even just listen, I'd be so grateful. Thank you for hearing me out. Sometimes, just saying it aloud is the first step to making it feel a little less overwhelming. Hey, I'm Andres. Well, Andres Vela now, and I'm 23. I've lived in the same old house since I was a baby. Honestly, that's exactly the problem. This house, or better said, the things living here with us, have haunted my life in ways I can barely explain. I've had these memories, strange and unsettling, since I was a kid. You know, the usual haunted house cliches. Chairs mysteriously sliding across the floor, these weird, creepy noises whispering from the walls late at night. When I was little, I was scared out of my wits. My whole family knew something was off, but they pretended everything was fine just so I wouldn't be terrified all the time. But time doesn't heal all wounds, and it certainly didn't make this house any less eerie. As I got older, it was clear my parents couldn't keep the secret anymore. When I was around 15, they finally told me the truth. The former owner, a woman named Monica J., had taken her own life in a tiny apartment just a few blocks away from our home. The police called it a suicide, but there were so many unanswered questions, weird circumstances, things that just didn't add up. My parents thought maybe that's why this house was haunted. I believed it too. My parents are devout Catholics. Actually, they're deeply involved in a religious group called Opus Sancta. One day, they brought a priest over to bless the house and even arranged a mass for Monica's soul. After that, they said the haunting was over, that it was best not to talk about it anymore. But you know what? That didn't help one bit, because the spirits here aren't like the usual ghost stories you hear. People imagine ghosts playing peekaboo, hiding and appearing when they want. But here, it's different. When one of these things moves past you, your vision blurs, like the world itself is warping. At night, you see shadows slithering along the walls, crawling through the darkness like they own the place. Over the years, I've seen a woman, maybe that was Monica, and a little boy dressed in a tuxedo, just floating around. We have this big statue of the Virgin Mary in our inner courtyard, about 4 feet tall, and one night, I swore I saw her cry. The tears were so real, carved with such detail, I thought it was just the craftsmanship playing tricks on me. But when I touched the statue, the tears were wet. I nearly felt my soul leave my body right then and there. After all these years, my family and I sort of got used to the eerie things happening around us. We all know something's wrong, but it's like we learned to live with it. For the most part, these spirits don't scare me anymore. Except for one. There's one entity that terrifies me beyond anything I've ever faced, and it's the real reason I'm telling you all this now. This entity mainly stalks my older sister, Mara Vela. It started about 8 years ago. Mara told us how, night after night, she felt this tall, shadowy figure watching her while she slept. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, only to see that dark presence looming over her bed. She was so scared that she started sleeping with our dog, a boxer named Luna, who was usually super alert and protective. But Mara told us that this thing could make Luna sleep like she was in a coma. She'd poke and prod Luna, and the dog wouldn't budge. It was like the entity could control even the dog's senses. Things got worse. Mara would wake up with deep bruises and an overwhelming sense of dread crushing her chest. She was desperate for help, so our parents called the priest again. The priest told us the evil haunting her might be something inhuman, a demon. He gave us holy water and blessed salt to sprinkle around Mara's room, and suggested putting statues of saints there for protection. But the entity smashed those statues to bits and ignored every attempt to keep it away. The priest came back and said Mara was suffering from an infestation, that only faith could save her. I'm not Catholic myself, and honestly, I'm skeptical that faith alone will do the trick. But we tried everything. I'm telling you all this because recently, that same terrifying thing came for me again. I've only experienced its presence once before, but that first time was something I can't forget. I was about 17, home alone, reading a book. Actually, it was a fantasy novel, much like Harry Potter, a story I loved as a kid. It was around 4 in the afternoon, a cloudy day, and the light filtered softly through my window. Suddenly, I felt this crushing weight inside me, like an invisible force smacking me full on. I stopped reading because the feeling got unbearable. My whole body ached strangely, not like a normal ache, but a numbness, like I'd been beaten down. It was similar to that muscle soreness you get after intense exercise, but deeper, colder. Then I saw it, a huge, dark figure gliding through the air, moving closer and closer. It stopped just inches from me, and it was so massive that it blocked the daylight, plunging my room into a suffocating darkness. I started sweating and shaking uncontrollably. I had no idea what to do. Then, without speaking aloud, it communicated with me, not with words, but directly inside my mind. It filled my head with the worst insults, the cruelest things you can imagine. It twisted my thoughts, calling me worthless, broken. I covered my ears, begging it to leave me alone. For what felt like an eternity, it tormented me. Then, suddenly, it vanished. But the aftermath was worse. I could barely breathe, drenched in sweat, my body still numb. But the worst feeling was this awful sense of violation, like something had invaded my very soul. It's hard to explain, but it felt like the helplessness some people endure after traumatic abuse. I broke down crying, overwhelmed by despair. An hour later, my mom came home. I told her everything and begged her to take me to a doctor, thinking I might be losing my mind. The tests came back normal, physically and mentally, which only confirmed to me that what I experienced was real. Now, this horrible presence has come back again, and I don't know how much longer I can bear it. I'm reaching out because no priests have been able to help us. I'm desperate. If anyone out there has faced this kind of terror or knows how to banish such an entity, please, please, I need your help. I can't stand living with this shadow any longer. Hey, I want to share something really strange that happened to me just last night. Now, I'm not sure if this was something paranormal, or maybe just sleep paralysis, or some weird mix of both, but I feel like I have to tell someone about it. Maybe you'll know if there's a deeper meaning here. So, it started with me just not being able to sleep. I was lying there, wide awake, scrolling through TikTok. You know how sometimes you just get stuck in a loop? Well, a tarot reading video popped up, and it honestly felt like it was speaking directly to me. So I ended up watching a longer version of the reading, hoping maybe it would help me find some peace or insight. But then, out of nowhere, this sudden wave of unease just washed over me. Like my skin prickled and my heart started racing. I decided, okay, enough of this. I'm going to try and sleep now. As soon as the clock struck 3 a.m., and I mean exactly 3 o'clock, this lightning bolt of terror shot through my entire body, from the tips of my toes all the way up to the crown of my head. It felt like something invisible had slipped inside me, creeping slowly from my feet upwards. Right after that, my whole room seemed to creak. Not like a ghostly creak, but the kind you hear when a house settles late at night. That slow, groaning noise that makes you suddenly very aware of the silence around you. And then, just when I thought I was imagining things, I heard small knocks. They weren't loud, but enough to make me pause. Taps that sounded like footsteps, maybe, right there in my room. To calm myself down, I grabbed my phone again and started playing some ASMR sounds. You know, those soft whispers and gentle tapping noises that are supposed to soothe you. For a while, it helped, but then the room's temperature dropped so noticeably that I went from sweating to shivering in what felt like seconds. I tried to lay still and drift off again. I was lying on my stomach, and my thoughts started to wander. And then this name kept repeating in my head. Adam, 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 over and over. And then suddenly, the name switched to Eve. As soon as Eve entered my mind, it felt like an invisible force was pressing my head down into the pillow, pushing my entire body closer to the mattress. It wasn't just pressure. It was like a magnetic pull holding me down, making it impossible to move. At the back of my head, I felt this pulsing sensation, and with each pulse, I heard the sound of metal banging against metal. Clang, 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 echoing in my mind. Then, a voice whispered inside me, repeating over and over, Eve, Eve, Eve. And this, my name, is healing. It was eerie, but somehow felt both terrifying and strangely comforting at the same time. I tried to open my eyes, but I couldn't. I realized I might be experiencing sleep paralysis, so I focused all my energy on wiggling my toes and fingers, hoping to snap out of it. When I finally managed to move, I tried to sit up, but it was like I was jolted back into that same paralyzed state, hearing the banging and feeling that push down again. Eventually, I broke free completely. But after that, I couldn't sleep at all. The sensation of being pulled down was like a magnet holding me to the ground, and it left me shaken. I honestly don't know what happened. Maybe it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks after that tarot video. But a few nights ago, I had this vivid dream where I was being chased by a demon, and now, I'm definitely not looking forward to going to sleep tonight. Now, on a completely different but also spooky note, my fiancé and I have been binge-watching loads of paranormal videos on YouTube lately, so maybe we've just got ghosts on the brain. Our son, who's 5 years old, told us he heard tapping on his window on Christmas Eve night. At first, I thought it was probably my fiancé playing a prank or something, but when I asked him, he said it wasn't him. I figured maybe our little guy was just imagining things, or maybe he was trying to get attention. But then, something happened last night that really freaked us out. My fiancé woke me up early this morning. I had dozed off on the couch next to him while he was working late. He said he heard what sounded like the screen door closing. You know, that sharp creak and slam. So he turned to look and actually saw the door move slightly, like it was being pushed. When he went outside to check, there was nothing there. But here's the weird part. Shortly after that, he noticed 2 scratches on his chest, just out of nowhere. We're both pretty creeped out, especially since we've been soaking up all these ghost stories and weird videos lately. So yeah, that's what's been going on in our house. Weird knocks, mysterious scratches, and a night filled with strange names and unexplainable pressure. I don't know if it's all connected or just a coincidence, but it's definitely got me on edge. Thanks for listening to my rambling. If you've ever experienced anything like this, or if you have any insight into what it might mean, I'd love to hear from you. Hey, I want to share with you the scariest thing that ever happened to me when I was a kid. It took place in this old apartment building we lived in back in Chicago. The whole place always felt kind of eerie, like there was something dark lurking around, and we had more than a few paranormal experiences. But this one, it really stuck with me, and I think about it often. So, picture this. To get into our building, you'd have to go through this rusty iron gate. Once you stepped inside, there was a short cement path, probably just about 5 seconds of walking, leading you to a set of stairs. Climbing those stairs, you'd see the windows of the first floor apartment right in front of you. If you looked to your right, there was a door that led into the apartment complex itself. Now, stepping through that door, you'd find yourself in this tiny little room with 2 doors. The door on the left took you into the first floor apartment, and the door on the right led to the staircase to my apartment on the second floor. The stairs were kind of like a spiral, twisting up in a narrow shaft. When you reached the top, there was another door. Opening that door got you fully inside our apartment, and you'd be standing right in the living room. All right, now to the day it happened. I was about 15 and home alone one afternoon. I was sitting in the living room, totally absorbed in watching some anime. The kind where you're just glued to the screen, right? Then, out of nowhere, I heard the front door to the building open, that first door we talked about, and then the second door, the one that leads into the staircase. At first I thought, oh great, my mom's back early from work, or maybe my brother just finished wrestling practice. I was actually pretty excited to not be alone anymore. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs, getting louder and louder. I glanced down at the bottom of the door to the apartment, and I saw a shadow, like someone's silhouette creeping under the door. Usually, I'd hear the jingle of keys right about now. You know, the usual unlocking sounds. But this time, nothing. Just that shadow. And then, slowly, I started hearing this scratching noise, like fingernails dragging from the top of the door all the way down to the bottom. It was slow and deliberate, and honestly, I thought my brother was messing with me, playing some weird prank. So I tried to ignore it and kept watching my show. But the scratching didn't stop. It got louder, more intense, more frantic even. And that shadow? Still there, hanging out under the door. At this point, I was getting annoyed, thinking, dude, I'm trying to watch TV here, stop messing around. I got up from the couch, heart pounding a little, and went over to the door. Without thinking much, I slammed it open, expecting to catch my brother red-handed. But there was no one there. No mom, no brother, nothing. I checked behind the door, still nothing. But the scratches on the door were real. Deep, fresh marks, as if someone had really clawed at it. My breath hitched, and suddenly my heart was racing like crazy. I bolted down the stairs, out of the apartment, and called my brother right away. He was still at wrestling practice. That's when the fear really set in, because whoever, or whatever, had been scratching at my door wasn't anyone I knew. It was just there. And that memory has stayed with me ever since. The silence that followed after I left the apartment was almost as loud as the scratching itself. And I never saw that shadow again, but I never forgot the feeling of being watched, or that slow, chilling scratch on the door. Thanks for listening. I hope you never have to experience something like that. Hey, I want to share something really strange that happened to me a few years ago. Something so physical and odd that I still can't quite wrap my head around it. It's one of those stories that sticks with you because it feels impossible, but I promise you, every word is true. So, hang tight and let me take you through it. Back when I was in college, during one summer break at home, I was getting ready to head back to school. Now, I'd been dating my boyfriend, let's call him Liam, for about 2 years at that point. The previous November, for our anniversary, he'd surprised me with a ring. But it wasn't just any ring. It was one I'd actually picked out myself from Pandora. It was a limited edition piece, something I hadn't seen anywhere else before I asked him for it. The ring was delicate but special, a simple red heart right in the center with a scalloped band. If you can picture it, the band had these little rounded edges that made it look almost like waves or petals. Nothing flashy, but to me, it was perfect. I wore it pretty much every single day, and I was careful with it. I always kept track of it, which is going to be important for what comes next. So the day before I was supposed to leave for school, I was busy packing up all my jewelry. In my rush, I accidentally packed away my everyday jewelry, including the ring from Liam. No big deal, I figured. I'd be moving boxes the next day, probably sweating and messing things up, so I didn't want to risk losing or ruining anything. I planned to unpack everything once I settled in at school. Now, here's a detail that sets the scene. 2 of my close friends, Jenna and Mike, had driven in from different states the day before to help us move into our college house together. They came to my dad's place to stay the night since it was on the way to school. We hung out in my room, watching some TV, just chilling and catching up. Eventually, we all turned in for the night because the next day was going to be a marathon of moving and unpacking. The next morning, when I woke up, something caught my eye right away. There, just to the right of my bed on this tiny ledge built into the wall, like 1.5 inches thick, barely enough space to rest anything, was a ring. I blinked a few times, rubbed my eyes, and reached over to pick it up. And here's where it gets weird. It looked exactly like the ring Liam had given me. Same scalloped band, same size. But instead of a red heart in the center, this one had a clear heart, like glass or crystal. I just stood there, holding it, feeling a weird mix of confusion and curiosity. How did it get there? I never noticed it on the ledge before. I grabbed the ring and walked back into the room where Jenna and Mike were still waking up. I showed it to them and joked, "Hey, did one of you leave your ring in my room? It's so funny, we both have the same one." But honestly, I'd known these 2 for years, and if either of them had a ring like this, I would have noticed long before. They both looked genuinely confused. Jenna shook her head and said, "Nope, that's not mine." Mike said the same. He'd never seen a ring like that before. I thought maybe they were pulling my leg, but their expressions told me otherwise. They seemed just as puzzled as I was. Not satisfied, I texted Liam right then and there. I asked if maybe he'd bought 2 versions of the ring, just to try out the colors, and forgotten about the second one, wondering if it had somehow ended up at my dad's house. He replied pretty quickly and said he definitely only bought 1 ring, the red one. No second ring, no clear heart. Still grasping for answers, I reached out to my dad's girlfriend, the only other woman who stayed in that house. I asked if she'd ever seen or owned a ring like that. She said she'd never laid eyes on it before. I was trying to find any logical explanation, but everything felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Maybe I never packed the red ring to begin with, and this clear one had been sitting on the ledge all along. But no. I ran back to my packed bag, dug through it, and pulled out the red ring Liam gave me. It was pristine, exactly as I remembered it, red heart and all. At that moment, I was holding 2 rings that were identical in every way except for the color of the heart. Both perfectly sized to fit me. Both real. Both absolutely inexplicable. I even checked Pandora's website later to see if the clear heart version was some kind of new release or something I'd missed. But the ring wasn't even listed anymore. No trace of it anywhere online. And here's the kicker. My dad's house is a historic farmhouse built back in the 1700s. It's the original homestead of the town he lives in. So, yeah, not exactly a place short on ghost stories or paranormal possibilities. I like to think maybe that house still holds some secrets. To this day, I honestly have no idea where that second ring came from or why it appeared on that ledge in my room. It's one of those little mysteries that just hangs in the back of your mind and makes you question everything. So, what do you think? Am I losing it? Did I accidentally misplace the ring? Or was it something else? Something that can't be explained? I'd love to hear your thoughts because, honestly, I'm still dying to understand what happened that summer morning. Hey, I want to share some stories that have been a part of my family's life in this house we moved into. It's a place with a deep, heavy history, and sometimes the past feels like it's still whispering to us. So, my dad bought this property that used to be part of an old plantation. Across the lane from us, the neighbors actually live in the original plantation house. It's a huge, grand old place, and Dad built a massive, beautiful home on our lot. We had these two enormous, ancient trees right in the front yard. Locals told us a chilling tale, that a teacher was once hung nearby for teaching the slave children how to read and write. I remember feeling this cold knot in my stomach when I first heard that. Almost as soon as we moved in, strange things started to happen to me. I would bring them up, but my family just brushed it off, joking that I was imagining things. But after a few weeks, I noticed something odd. Whenever I mentioned these experiences, my parents and brother would suddenly get quiet, almost like they were hiding something. Eventually, they opened up and admitted to their own encounters with the unexplainable in the house. Our house had a huge basement, one of the biggest I'd ever seen. Most of it was finished, but there were some unfinished parts behind doors leading out from the basement's living room area. There was also a finished office. In that office, up on the wall, there was this small door, maybe 3 feet off the floor, leading to a crawl space beneath the laundry room. One day, Dad asked my brother Jake to crawl in there to spread some gravel in a far corner. We'd been living there for years by then, and both Jake and I were in high school. Suddenly, Jake burst into my room, which, mind you, was 3 whole stories away from that crawl space, looking furious. He asked me if I was messing with him, playing a prank. I was shocked and told him no, then asked what was wrong. He said that every time he reached the far back corner of the crawl space, he'd hear this woman giggling from the office above. She'd slip her hand in, flick the light switch, still giggling, and then slam the little door shut, leaving him trapped in total darkness. Jake would have to army crawl through the dirt and gravel in pitch black, just to find the door and get out. And this had happened 3 or 4 times already. When he saw the stunned look on my face, he realized it couldn't have been me. So, I decided to go down there with him the next time. I sat right by the crawl space door with a flashlight, guarding the light switch and the door while he finished spreading the gravel. The whole basement felt colder, and the silence was thick, broken only by the sound of gravel scraping and our breathing. I kept my flashlight beam sharp, waiting, but that giggle never came while I was there. Still, that moment stuck with me, that eerie feeling you get when something unseen is watching you. Now, shifting gears a bit, I want to tell you about a dream I had not too long ago, around the time I found out I was pregnant, about a year ago. One of my close friends, Heather, had passed away suddenly in a tragic car accident. We were college friends, and she had just moved within an hour of where I live. The week before she died, we had plans for her to visit me the following weekend. It all felt so sudden and surreal. That night, I had this incredibly vivid dream. I was traveling to a city to visit her, but this wasn't any ordinary city. To get there, you had to have a guide, someone to lead you. In the dream, I was in this strange-looking car with a driver who was unnervingly tall, with shiny silver hair and a youthful, unwrinkled face. He didn't speak a word, he just drove, silently navigating through tidal waves that crashed over the road, hiding it from view. When we finally arrived, He dropped me off in this city that looked magical, but also surprisingly familiar, like any regular city you might see. I met Heather at a restaurant, and we talked just like old times. She kept telling me how happy she was. Losing her hit me hard, not only because I'd miss her terribly, but also because she had finally found someone special, a solid relationship, and she was dreaming of marriage and children. She just landed her dream job before she died too. We ate and talked, and she told me I was going to be so in love with my child that we would grow to be best friends as they grew up. While she spoke, I could see her running and playing in a sunlit field with a child. I couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl. My husband and I had decided to wait until birth to find out the gender. I asked her if she knew my baby. She smiled warmly and said yes, that they played together all the time. When I asked about the gender, she laughed and said, "I know your husband wants to be surprised, so I won't spoil it." After dinner, we walked out into the bustling streets filled with shops and happy people, the whole place buzzing with a joyful energy, almost like a city at Christmas. I asked her why she didn't come back with me. She smiled softly and said she couldn't, that she was very happy where she was. I felt a wave of sadness and asked if I could stay and shop with her a bit. She laughed gently, saying, "You know you can't stay." We hugged goodbye, and I climbed back into the strange car with my silent guide. That dream felt so real, so vivid. I truly believe it was her way of giving me peace, a sign that she was okay, even though she wasn't here with us anymore. And lastly, I want to tell you a story about my little brother, Max. When he was about 4 years old, I was 6. Mom told me this story later when I was old enough to understand. Max was like any typical little boy, obsessed with trucks, swords, and monsters. But one night, while Mom was tucking him in, he suddenly told her something strange. He said he remembered jumping out of a plane. He said he was the last one to jump, and that he had stuff strapped to his chest. Probably a parachute, or maybe bombs. What really shook Mom was how he described everything in perfect detail. The World War II U.S. military uniform, the look of the plane, the color and guide of his boots. He talked about how he and other men had to jump to save something. Then, just like that, he went to sleep. Now, Max had no way of knowing about wars or military uniforms. We didn't even have phones or internet back then, and no one teaches preschoolers about World War II. It really freaked Mom out. Looking back, it's pretty eerie. Max doesn't remember any of it now. Grandma, our Mimi, has always said that Max and I might have some kind of psychic abilities passed down from her. And honestly, sometimes I wonder if she's right. So yeah, these are some of the stories from my life. A house with a heavy past, a dream that brought comfort from beyond, and a little brother who glimpsed into a past life. They've all left me with this feeling that the world we live in is much bigger and stranger than we realize. I've had a handful of experiences in my life that I still can't explain, but this one remains the strangest. I rarely talk about it because I know how it sounds. People might think I'm lying, losing my mind, or trying to make myself look better than I was. And honestly, I don't come out of this story looking like a good person. It happened in 2021, when lockdown restrictions and curfews were still making the roads unusually quiet. I was driving home along a route I knew extremely well. There was a woman sitting beside me, and we were in the middle of a terrible argument. I lost control of my anger and hit her. There is no excuse for that. It was wrong. The atmosphere inside the car felt unbearably heavy. I was shouting, she was crying, and she was clearly frightened of me. Outside, a thick mist covered everything. I could barely see 15 meters beyond the headlights. We were traveling along a long, straight road. Eventually, we reached a red traffic light and stopped. She tried to get out of the car, but I prevented her from leaving. About half a kilometer farther down that road, there was another traffic light. I knew it was there because I had driven that route countless times. As I pulled away, I kept thinking about it. I was waiting for it to appear because I was worried she might try to get out again. But the traffic light never came. I continued driving while the argument carried on. Then I looked to my right, and something felt wrong. The surroundings seemed familiar, but they weren't where we were supposed to be. It was the unsettling feeling of recognizing a place without understanding how you had reached it. I asked her, "Where are we?" She looked outside and said, "Belleville South." That answer immediately drained all the anger out of me. We had been driving through Durbanville. Somehow, while traveling straight along a road with no nearby turnoffs, we had ended up in an area roughly 15 minutes away. It didn't feel as though 15 minutes had passed. From my perspective, only a few seconds had gone by between waiting for the next traffic light and realizing we were suddenly on a completely different road. I was shocked. I kept trying to understand how it could have happened. I hadn't been drinking. I wasn't under the influence of anything. I was completely sober, although I was intoxicated by my own anger. There was no obvious turn I could have taken by mistake. The surrounding area had long stretches of open land, and the next road capable of taking us in that direction was kilometers away. I don't believe in God, at least not in the traditional sense, and I've never been someone who talks about divine intervention. But sometimes I wonder what might have happened if we hadn't suddenly appeared on that other road. That thought is difficult to admit. The experience interrupted something dark inside me. It frightened me back into awareness. Whatever happened that night, it may have stopped the situation from becoming even worse. I still get goosebumps when I remember it. The woman who was with me that night was also present during 2 other strange experiences in my life. I'm not saying she caused any of them. What unsettled me was that whenever I brought up that night, she acted as though nothing unusual had happened. Either she didn't remember it the way I did, or it simply didn't disturb her. Over the years, I've searched for explanations. I've read stories from people who claim to lose time, skip distances, or suddenly find themselves somewhere they couldn't logically have reached. One detail appears surprisingly often in those stories: thick mist. And the mist that night was incredibly dense. Was it the weather? The emotional energy inside the car? A moment of confusion caused by rage and fear? Something connected to her? Or something stranger that I don't have the language to describe? I honestly don't know. I consider myself a logical person. I want events to have clear causes and sensible explanations. But no matter how many times I replay that night, logic has never been able to tell me how a straight road carried us somewhere it shouldn't have. I know this might sound strange, and I'm completely open to the possibility that I'm connecting things that aren't actually connected. But when I look back at everything that happened in that house, especially everything involving the kitchen, the pattern feels too unsettling to ignore. I really need to hear what other people think. There are a few details that might matter. My grandmother practiced what she called white witchcraft. She used cleansing rituals, burned sage regularly, and apparently experimented with a spirit board when she was younger. Something frightening supposedly happened during one of those sessions, but nobody in the family would ever tell me exactly what it was. Then there was the house itself. Before my family lived there, an elderly man had died in the kitchen. I don't know much about him or the circumstances surrounding his death, but that room eventually became the center of everything. My mom wanted to spend all her time there. She slept there, obsessed over renovating it, and seemed emotionally attached to it in a way I couldn't understand. My parents bought the house around 2013. At first, everything seemed fairly normal, although I was still young and probably didn't understand everything happening between them. Over time, their relationship became chaotic. They argued constantly, and some of the fights were deeply unhealthy. They separated several years later, but before that happened, things became almost impossible to follow. They changed the locks on each other, tried to keep each other out, and dragged each other through one conflict after another. My mom's behavior during that period could be extremely unpredictable. Once, she openly humiliated my dad in our home and seemed to find the whole situation funny. Eventually, she was awarded the house during the separation. For a while, my dad stayed there with his new partner and her child. Both of them later said they experienced unsettling things in the house too. They never described everything in detail, but hearing that made me wonder whether the atmosphere affected more than just my mom. Around the time my parents separated, my mom, my sister, and I temporarily moved in with my grandmother. While we were there, my mom seemed much more like herself. She wasn't talking or laughing to herself, and the strange behavior seemed to settle down. During that period, my mom and grandmother became interested in crystals, protective objects, and spiritual cleansing. When we eventually left my grandmother's house, most of those things disappeared from our everyday lives. Years later, after my boyfriend started visiting, I found one of the old crystals and placed it out again. I can't explain why, but part of me wondered whether I was trying to bring something calmer into the house. That's when I started thinking more seriously about the change in my mom. For years, she criticized my dad for drinking. It was one of the biggest issues in their relationship. But after they separated, she began drinking heavily herself. Not occasionally, it became frequent and intense. During arguments, it sometimes felt as though something in her expression shifted. She would close her eyes, her eyelids would twitch, and when she opened them again, she seemed colder. When I challenged her behavior, she would insult me and call me names no mother should call her daughter. Once, during an outburst, she destroyed her own phone with a cricket bat. She also began talking to herself. She would swear toward empty parts of the room, laugh when nobody had said anything, or appear to be answering someone who wasn't there. Then she started posting strange things online about creatures hiding beneath beds and dark forces watching people. She edited eerie pictures to accompany the posts and spent hours reading about demons and paranormal subjects. Around the same time, she began decorating the house with skulls, black ornaments, and objects that looked deliberately disturbing. Whenever my sister and I returned from our grandmother's freshly cleansed house, Mom would make us repeat a sentence about refusing bad luck or negative energy. She made us say it over and over before we properly entered the house. That always stayed with me. It felt as though she was afraid we might bring something protective back with us, although I know that could simply be my interpretation. Her appearance changed too. She started wearing almost entirely black makeup and darker clothing. She also became extremely sensitive to smells. Perfume would give her headaches, and she could somehow detect it even when it was hidden inside my bag. The scent she hated most was sandalwood. That was especially odd because sandalwood trees are common in the area where we lived. My boyfriend once gave me a bouquet of fresh flowers. The moment I brought them inside, Mom stared at them and asked why he had bought real flowers. "They're only going to die," she said. "He should have bought plastic ones." It wasn't just a passing comment. She genuinely seemed uncomfortable having the flowers in the house. She disliked my boyfriend from the beginning, even though he was always polite and respectful toward her. She regularly refused to let him visit and encouraged me to spend time with other people instead. Once, she told me I should find someone more polished and stop seeing a scruffy troublemaker. The wording sounded so unlike her that I remember wondering where it had come from. What made it stranger was that everyone else in my family liked him. My dad liked him. My stepmother liked him. My siblings got along with him. He had never given my mom a genuine reason to distrust him. He later told me that whenever he entered the house, he felt a heavy pressure across his shoulders. As soon as he stepped outside, the feeling disappeared. He said this before I had explained most of the history to him. A spiritual friend who visited the house described the atmosphere as oppressive. I know suggestions can influence people, but at the time, neither of them knew the full story. As I grew older, I began confronting my mom more often. I questioned the things she said and refused to pretend her behavior was normal. We still had good moments, and I never stopped loving her, but almost any small disagreement could suddenly become cruel. And somehow, everything kept circling back to the kitchen. The kitchen and living room formed one large open space. There was no wall separating them. One night, a vehicle lost control and crashed directly through the house, stopping in the kitchen. The impact was strong enough to tear part of the counter loose. Out of every possible section of the house, it struck that room. Afterward, Mum became completely focused on renovating the kitchen. The work dragged on for years. Whenever friends visited, I would tell them not to look, because it was supposedly still being remodeled. Then Mum announced that she was going to sell the house. Almost immediately, she rushed to finish the kitchen. Not long after that, she called me and said she had changed her mind. She couldn't sell anymore because she loved the new kitchen too much. She barely used the bedrooms. She spent most of her time in the kitchen and living area, and at one point, she moved a mattress into the room so she could sleep there. She also wrote swear words and angry messages across the refrigerator. Sometimes she claimed people were watching us. Someone in the family suggested she might have been cursed, although I don't know who first said it or whether they truly believed it. I also need to be honest about something important. My mom has a history of mental illness. For a long time, I didn't fully consider how much that could explain. I was too close to the situation, too young, and constantly trying to survive the next argument. Once I moved out, I had enough distance to look at everything more clearly. Sleep deprivation, alcohol, trauma, and untreated mental health problems could account for a lot of what I witnessed. I understand that, but the connection to the kitchen still troubles me. She seemed able to wake at any hour, as though she was never completely asleep. She disliked visitors and gradually pushed almost everyone away. She often left a door open whenever she was outside, even when there was no obvious reason to do so. Eventually, she told me she was selling the house and that I had until the end of the week to leave. After I moved out, she scrubbed my bedroom completely clean. My sister's room was left untouched so she could continue staying there. Part of me still wonders whether I was pushed out because I was the one who kept questioning what was happening. My younger sister rarely challenged Mom, and she was allowed to remain. I know this could sound like an ordinary conflict between a mother and daughter, especially one shaped by addiction, separation, and mental illness. But I love my mom more than I can explain. I grew up incredibly close to her. I don't want to label her as evil or turn her struggles into a ghost story. I just missed the person she used to be. Living with her became a constant gamble. Every conversation felt like a coin toss. She could be loving one moment and hostile the next, and I never knew which version of her I was going to meet. I had counseling while I was growing up because of everything happening at home. Over time, I learned to accept that I might never receive a simple explanation. This isn't a sudden crisis for me. Something has felt wrong for many years. Maybe the house had nothing to do with it. Maybe the kitchen became important to her because it represented control, comfort, trauma, or a place she could retreat to when everything else in her life was falling apart. Maybe the drinking and mental illness changed her behavior more than I understood. Or maybe there was something about that house that none of us could explain. I'm not claiming to know the answer. I'm only trying to understand what I lived through without losing sight of reality. Do you think all of this could be explained by mental illness, trauma, and alcohol? Or do you think there might have been something else influencing the atmosphere in that house? I just need to know whether anyone else can see the pattern I keep seeing, because sometimes I'm afraid I'm the only one. I grew up in a house that always felt normal, at least at first. My parents and I moved there when I was around 9 years old. It was an older place, built not long after World War II. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a living room, dining room, pool, garage, and this extra little room behind the garage. Nothing strange happened for the first couple of years, so none of us had any reason to think the house was anything but ordinary. Then my cousin Mira came to stay with us from Europe. She was supposed to be there for a few months, and about a week after she arrived, she brought something up at breakfast. She looked at me and said, "Can you please stop knocking on my door at night? And stop trying to open it?" I remember staring at her, completely confused, because I had no idea what she was talking about. I told her it wasn't me. A few weeks later, she said it had started again. The knocking, the doorknob turning, someone trying to get in. Then after a while, she stopped mentioning it. Eventually, she went back to Europe, and life went quiet again. At least for a little while. About 2 months after she left, when I was 12, I had one of those nights where I just could not fall asleep. I tossed and turned for hours. I turned on the radio, I tried reading. Nothing worked. It was close to 3 in the morning, and the wind outside was really strong. From my bedroom, I saw what I thought was my mother coming out of my parents' room. She was wearing a pale pink robe and a little pink bonnet. That immediately felt strange to me, because my mom never wore a bonnet to sleep. I didn't even think she owned one. And I knew her robe at the time was blue, not pink. Still, I thought maybe she was going to the kitchen. She would sometimes check the stove at night to make sure the burners were off. So I got up and followed her. I went down one hallway, then another. I checked the bathroom. Nothing. The family room. Nothing. The dining area. Nothing. The kitchen. Nothing. I kept thinking, okay, she has to be in the living room, or maybe the second dining area. But there was nobody there. That was when the chills hit me. Not just a little shiver either. It was that deep, cold feeling where your whole body knows something is wrong before your mind catches up. I went back to my parents' bedroom and woke my mom up. I asked her how she had gotten back to bed so fast. She looked half asleep and told me she had never gotten up. I told her, "No, I saw you. You were wearing a pink bonnet and a pink robe." She said, "I don't own a bonnet, and my robe is blue." Then she told me to go back to sleep. But I couldn't. I knew what I had seen, and I knew it had not been my mother. I went and turned on the hallway light, then closed my bedroom door. My dad woke up, came out, and turned the light off. So I got up and turned it right back on. The next morning, when everyone was awake and actually listening, I told them everything. My mom said I must have imagined it, which made me really upset because I knew I hadn't. I described exactly what I saw. My dad believed me. Later, he told our next-door neighbor, Mr. Harris, what had happened. And that was when we learned the story. According to him, back in the early 1950s, a single man who had been a soldier lived in our house. A married couple lived nearby. While the husband was away on business trips, the wife and the soldier started having an affair. One day, the husband came home early to surprise his wife, but she wasn't there. A neighbor across the street told him what had been going on and said he had seen it happening for months. The husband went home, got a gun, and came to the house we lived in. He found his wife there with the soldier. She ran, and he chased her outside, all the way toward the driveway beside my parents' bedroom. That was where he shot her. After hearing that, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman I saw in the pink robe. I wondered if maybe she was still there. Maybe she didn't even know she was dead. We stayed in that house until I was in my early 20s, and I was honestly relieved when my parents finally sold it. I never saw the woman again, but later I moved into the room where my cousin had stayed. That was when the knocking started for me. Something would bang on the door and try to turn the handle. Glasses would shatter for no reason. Some nights, I would feel something shove me off the bed. Years later, I looked the house up online. After my parents sold it, it had been sold 17 different times. And when I saw that, all I could think was, maybe every family after us eventually felt what we felt. Maybe that house never let anyone stay for long. I only ever captured one ghost photo that truly felt real to me. It was on an old iPad years ago, and the strange part is, I don't have it anymore. It was deleted completely by accident when my little boy, who was only a toddler at the time, entered the wrong passcode too many times. Back then, the security settings were brutal. These days, you usually have to turn that kind of data wiping feature on yourself, but at the time, it was just built in. 6 wrong attempts, and the whole thing basically self-destructed. 2 years of photos and memories vanished. No backup, no iCloud. And tucked in there with everything else was the one image I still think about. The ghost photo. I remember thinking, of course, the strangest, most impossible thing I've ever captured, and now there's no proof of it. It felt almost ridiculous, like the universe had handed me something extraordinary, then quietly taken it back before anyone could properly see it. This happened about 9 years ago at Barry Pomeroy Castle in southwest England. I'm Australian, so it's not exactly somewhere I can casually revisit on a weekend and try again. It was the middle of the afternoon, in summer, with clear skies. Honestly, the most unbelievable part of the story might be that it was actually sunny in England. I had taken the photo because of a wall. Not a dramatic doorway, not a tower, not some gloomy underground passage. Just an old wall inside the grounds. The light was falling beautifully across the handmade bricks, and I thought it would make a good reference for a watercolor painting later. But there was also this feeling about it. Nothing obvious, nothing theatrical, just a quiet pull, like some small, invisible hand had tugged at my attention and said, "Here, look here." So I took the picture. That night, when I was looking through the photos, I saw her. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. You know how the mind can make shapes out of shadows and stone? But the longer I looked, the clearer she became. A woman. She seemed to be sitting with her arms out beside her. She was terribly thin, with sharp collarbones, long dark hair, and pale skin. Her face looked hollow, with dark shadows around her eyes, and her mouth was open in this silent, awful expression. She blended into the stones almost perfectly, but once I saw her, I couldn't unsee her. It was like one of those magic eye pictures from childhood. One moment there's nothing there, and then, suddenly the image rises out of the pattern, and your brain can never go back to not knowing. She looked anguished. That was the part that stayed with me. Not just the shape of her, but the feeling that came through it. Deep sadness. Real suffering. I sat there staring at the image, and it genuinely shook me. I handed the iPad to my partner and only said, "Do you see her?" They looked for a moment, then went very still and said, "Yes, I do." And that was enough. I hadn't explained what I thought I was seeing. I hadn't pointed anything out. They saw her too. Now, Barry Pomeroy has its own ghost stories, of course. One of the best known is about the Green Lady's Tower. The story goes that a woman was imprisoned there by her jealous sister and left to starve to death hundreds of years ago. Whether you call that history, legend, or something in between, it's one of the hauntings people often talk about when they mention the place. When I visited the tower, it was covered in ivy, with green light filtering through the leaves. It was easy to understand the name. It had that soft, mossy, storybook kind of atmosphere. But the strange thing is, I didn't feel afraid there. I'd expected to. I went in half prepared to be spooked, but the tower felt peaceful to me. Beautiful, even. I remember wondering whether all the ghost stories had just been exaggerated over time for tourists. Then I tried to go down into the dungeon. There were 2 entrances, one on either side. I started with the left one. The stairs were well lit, the walls were plain, and there was nothing visually frightening about it. But halfway down, I was hit with this sudden, overwhelming terror. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't imagination. It felt physical, almost animal. A hard, primal fear that grabbed me in the chest and told me, very clearly, not to keep going. I tried to push through it, because I'm stubborn and I really did want to see everything. But I couldn't. The feeling was too strong. The place felt claustrophobic, hostile, and terribly wrong. So I turned back. A little while later, I tried the other dungeon entrance, thinking maybe I'd just startled myself the first time. The same thing happened. Halfway down, that heavy dread came over me again. Not exactly fear this time, but despair. A thick, sinking feeling that made it impossible to continue. So I gave up. I remember thinking it was strange that everyone made such a fuss about the tower, when the dungeon was the place that felt truly awful to me. Maybe the old story had shifted over time. Maybe the wrong place had inherited the legend. Or maybe places hold more than one sorrow. After that, I went back up into the sunlight and walked around the grounds, trying to shake off the feeling. I started photographing the stones and walls again, just to settle myself. That was when I took the picture. Not in the tower, not in the dungeon, just near an ordinary wall, maybe 20 feet or so from the tower. And somehow, that was where she appeared. I wish I could show it to you. I really do. But another part of me has always wondered whether it was never meant to be kept. When I still had the photo, I remember feeling uneasy about sharing it publicly. Not because I was afraid people would mock it, though I'm sure some would have. It was more that the image felt private somehow. There was such pain in her face. It didn't feel like a trophy. It didn't feel like something to wave around online and invite strangers to pick apart for entertainment. It felt like I had witnessed something terribly sad, something that deserved respect. I know that may sound strange, but if you've ever felt something like that, you'll understand. Some hauntings, if that's what they are, don't feel like performances. They feel like wounds. And wounds shouldn't be paraded. Still, I wish I had it. I wish I could show it to the right people, quietly, respectfully, and say, "Here, this is what I saw. This is what I felt." But I can't. The photo is gone. And maybe that's part of the story too. Maybe she allowed herself to be seen once, just briefly, and then the image was taken back. Maybe it was never mine to keep. I know people say, trust your gut, all the time. And it can start to sound like one of those internet phrases that gets passed around until it loses meaning. But a few months ago, at Reagan National Airport, my body reacted to a stranger so strongly that I still think about it. My husband and I had just gotten off an overnight flight from Seattle. We were exhausted, in that weird, foggy way you only get after sleeping badly on a plane. Everything felt too bright, too loud, and slightly unreal. The pickup area downstairs was packed, so we took our bags up to departures instead. It was early, still cold outside, but the air felt good after being trapped in airports all night. We stood near one of the concrete barriers while my husband called his aunt, who was coming to get us. Traffic was crawling, so we knew we'd be waiting a while. That's when this man walked over. At first, nothing about him seemed strange. He looked completely ordinary. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. Clean jacket, earbuds in, groomed. The kind of person you'd assume worked in tech or finance or something like that. He complimented my husband's coat. My husband said thanks. Then he complimented mine too, and I kind of laughed and said, "Thanks, man, appreciate it." He smiled, but it didn't quite land right. He said, "Yeah, I'm sure you do." It was such a small thing. Not enough to be rude exactly, just a little off. Still, we kept talking. He asked where we were headed, and we said family was picking us up. Then he started talking about family too, but every sentence had this sourness underneath it. Like he was joking, but not really. At one point, he said something about family and friends only pretending to matter. We tried to be kind. Just polite stranger conversation while waiting for a ride. And then, suddenly, everything changed. I don't know how else to explain it except that the air around us felt different. My whole body went cold. Not regular nervousness, not social discomfort. It was fear. Deep, physical fear. The kind your body seems to understand before your brain catches up. His face had changed. He was still speaking in a normal voice, but his eyes were different. There was this anger in them that hadn't been there before. He was looking at us in a way that felt almost hateful, like he was imagining something terrible and we were part of it. That was when I noticed he didn't have a suitcase, just a backpack, which stuck out to me because he had been talking like he'd just come off a long trip. Then, very casually, he said, "I don't really have anywhere to go." Written out, I know that doesn't sound terrifying, but standing there with him, every instinct in me was screaming that something was wrong. My husband is usually the kind of person who gets drawn into conversation and tries to be friendly even when things get awkward. So I knew I had to get us away without making it obvious. I said I needed to use the bathroom and started walking back inside. The man looked at me and said, "Bathroom, huh?" That made my skin crawl, but I kept moving. Once I got inside and down toward arrivals, I called my husband. I tried to keep my voice calm, but I said, "You need to come inside right now. Something is seriously wrong with that guy." While I was on the phone, I heard the man in the background say, "Is that him? Tell him to come back out." My husband ended the conversation politely, something like, "Good talking to you, man." And the stranger said, in this cold, mocking voice, "Yeah, I'm sure it was." A minute later, my husband came inside. The second I saw him, I felt this huge wave of relief. Before I could even explain, he looked at me and said, "No, I know. That was really scary." That was when I realized I hadn't imagined it. We waited inside until his aunt pulled up. When we got into the car, she was happy to see us and asking about the flight, and I remember feeling so grateful she was there. Not just because we were tired and wanted to go home, but because it felt like she had unknowingly pulled us out of something we didn't understand. As we drove away from the airport, I tried to explain what had happened. I was talking too fast, stumbling over the details, trying to make it sound as frightening as it had felt. But the more I explained it, the weaker it sounded. He never threatened us. He never yelled. He never followed us. Technically, nothing happened. But I have never felt my body warn me about someone like that before. As we pulled away, we passed him sitting alone farther down the terminal. He didn't look at us, but I stared at him through the window, still shaking inside, with the strongest feeling that we had narrowly avoided something I'll never be able to prove. I've never really told this story before, at least not like this. It's been about 7 years now, and even thinking about it still makes my skin tighten. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts. I'm not religious either. I've always been the kind of person who tries to explain things logically. But this? I still don't know what to do with it. Back in 2019, my girlfriend at the time, Lena, and I had just started dating. We were living in Northern California, and for weeks we'd been talking about going camping together. Just one night in a tent, somewhere quiet, somewhere a little wild. It felt exciting, like one of those early relationship adventures where everything is new and you want to make a memory. It was March, so a lot of the campgrounds up near the Sierra Nevada were still closed for the season. We knew that going in. I honestly can't remember the name of the place anymore, which bothers me a little now. We packed the car, drove a couple of hours from the Bay Area, and arrived sometime around late afternoon, maybe 4:30. The front gate was closed, so we parked there and walked the rest of the way in, about a mile down the road to the actual campground. And I want to be clear about this. We didn't see another person the entire time. No cars, no campers, no voices. Not even any sign that someone else had been there recently. Before we left, I had checked the weather. It was supposed to be cloudy, maybe chilly, but no rain. Lena felt completely fine too, which matters because of what happened later. At first, everything was beautiful. We set up the tent, walked around the empty campground, and found this quiet stretch near the water. We took pictures. We laughed. It felt peaceful in that strange, off-season way, like the whole place had been set aside just for us. Then, around early evening, Lena told me she didn't feel right. It came on suddenly. One minute she was fine, and the next she looked pale and tired. I remember joking that maybe the elevation was getting to her, trying to keep things light. We decided to eat something and rest. That was when I noticed how dark it had gotten. Not just sunset dark. It felt heavier than that. The clouds had rolled in fast, and the air had changed. I could see the trees starting to move in the wind, and the campground didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt awake. I put the rain fly over the tent, just in case, and while I was doing it, I got this feeling so strong that I actually stopped moving. Someone was watching us. I don't know how else to say it. I didn't hear a voice. I didn't see a figure. There was no obvious reason for it. But every part of me suddenly knew we were not alone out there. I looked around, shining my flashlight toward the trees, the road, the empty campsites. Nothing. But the feeling stayed. Then Lena started getting worse. Within maybe 30 or 40 minutes, she went from feeling off to coughing hard. Then she told me her chest felt tight. Then she said she was having trouble breathing. That was when the rain started. We got inside the tent. The wind wasn't terrible at first, just enough to shake the fabric a little. But after maybe 10 minutes, there was this violent blast of air, sudden and sharp, and it ripped the rain fly right off the tent. I jumped out immediately. There was nobody there. No person running away. No movement. No sound except the rain and the trees. And the strange thing is, I never felt another gust like that the rest of the night. Not even close. Standing outside in the dark, soaked and confused, I felt it again. That same watched feeling. Only this time, it was stronger. I looked back at Lena inside the tent, and she was wheezing. And something in me just snapped into focus. I had camped plenty of times before. I'd been in the mountains in snow, in freezing weather, in stupid situations where I should have planned better. Usually, I liked that kind of uncertainty. I liked the challenge. But this was different. This didn't feel adventurous. It felt wrong. I looked at the rainfly on the ground, the darkness pressing in around the campsite, and Lena struggling to breathe, and I had one clear thought. We are in danger. I told her, "Something isn't right. We need to leave right now." I packed everything as fast as I could. I didn't fold anything. I didn't organize anything. I just shoved it all together, grabbed what mattered, and got us moving. The walk back to the car felt much longer than a mile. The rain got harder, but the wind stayed strangely calm. And as we walked, both of us kept looking over our shoulders because we could hear something behind us. Not close enough to see, not far enough to ignore. It sounded almost like footsteps on the road, or maybe in the brush just beside it. Every time I turned the flashlight back, I could only see a short distance. The beam felt useless, like the dark was swallowing it after a few dozen feet. We started walking faster. Then we were almost jogging. By the time we reached the car, we were both scared in a way I still have trouble explaining. We threw everything inside, climbed in, and I started driving. And the moment we pulled away from that campground, the feeling faded. Not slowly, not gradually. It was just gone. Lena kept getting worse, though. Once we got back toward the Bay Area, we stopped at an emergency room. She had developed a sudden respiratory infection over the course of just a few hours. I know how that sounds. I know there are probably explanations for pieces of it. Weather changes, bad timing. Fear-making sounds seem closer than they were. But all these years later, my body still remembers that place. Even now, living far away, nowhere near that campground, I can feel the hair rising on the back of my neck when I think about it. Something was wrong there that night. And whatever it was, it did not want us to stay. I don't mind sharing this at all. I'll tell it the way I remember it, one piece at a time, because this particular thing happened more than once. And honestly, it was the thing that really scared my brother. At the time, my brother and I shared a bedroom in this old ranch-style house. We had a bunk bed, and like a lot of kids, we were usually not asleep when we were supposed to be. We'd stay up late playing Nintendo with the sound turned all the way down, trying not to get caught. I was probably around 10 or 11, sometime in the mid-90s. The strange part always started about an hour after everyone else had gone to bed. We'd hear this loud bang from the side of the room where the closet was. And I mean loud. Not a little knock, not a house settling sound, not a door shifting. The inside of that closet shared a wall with the kitchen, so we knew what the cupboards sounded like when someone shut them. And that's exactly what it sounded like. A cupboard door being slammed shut. But not from inside the closet. From the kitchen side. It would happen again and again, with no real rhythm to it. Sometimes there would be only a few seconds between bangs. Sometimes it would be closer to a minute. But every time, it sounded angry, intentional. Like someone was standing in the dark, slamming a cabinet door over and over. My brother Marcus would immediately whisper for me to turn everything off. The TV, the game, all of it. Then we'd just lie there in the dark, completely still, barely breathing. The odd thing about fear is that eventually, somehow, sleep still gets you. So I honestly don't know how long the banging usually went on. It could have been 10 minutes. It could have been much longer. I just remember that it happened a lot. Sometimes once a week, sometimes every other night, and sometimes several nights in a row. I tried to explain it away. We lived out in the California high desert, and the wind could get pretty intense out there. So for a while, I told myself maybe the wind was rattling something. But there was never any pattern. It didn't only happen on windy nights. It didn't stop when the weather was calm. That explanation never really fit. The layout of the house made it even stranger. All the bedrooms were on one side, connected by one hallway, and our room was right near the entrance to that hallway. If anyone got up and walked toward the kitchen, we would have heard them. We would have seen something. But we never did. A few times, curiosity got the better of me. I'd quietly get out of bed and check. First, I'd look in my parents' room and my sister's room just to make sure everyone was actually asleep. And they always were. Then I'd head toward the living room and kitchen. Every single time, the house would be dark and silent. No cabinet moving, no footsteps, nothing out of place. What unsettled me most was that sometimes the banging would still be happening right up until I left our room. Then the second I stepped into the hallway, it would stop. Like whatever was doing it knew I was coming. After that happened a couple of times, I stopped wanting to check. Eventually, Marcus moved out to live with his biological mother. Once he was gone, I had the room to myself, and the banging stopped. I don't remember it happening even one time after that. Not while I was trying to sleep, not while I was up late playing games. Not once. Years later, I heard people talk about the idea that poltergeist activity can sometimes be connected to emotions, especially around teenagers. Anger, stress, tension, that sort of thing. I have no idea whether there's any truth to that, but I'll admit, it made me think of Marcus. He had a lot going on back then. He was insecure, angry, jealous, always wound tight. So maybe that had something to do with it. Or maybe it didn't. The part I still can't really explain is that no one else in the house ever heard it. I asked my parents and my sister about it while it was happening, and later on too. They all said they had no idea what I was talking about. That still seems impossible to me, because those bangs were so loud, I could feel them in my ears. But yeah, that house was something else, and that was only one of the things that happened there. I grew up in a house where, after a while, seeing someone who wasn't really there became almost normal. It happened to all of us. Family, visitors, everybody. Someone would catch a person moving through the house or walking past the front yard, especially near the big windows outside my parents' bedroom. We ended up calling him Benny, mostly because a few people said the figure looked blonde. To me, though, he was always just this dark shape. At least, that was true until the day I saw him in the bedroom I shared with my brother. I was walking down the hallway when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone in our room. Blonde hair, red shirt, about my brother's height and build, so I didn't even stop. I just assumed it was him. Then I stepped into the living room, turned toward the kitchen, and there was my sister talking to my brother. The same brother I thought I had just seen. I immediately backed up, leaned into the hallway, and looked into our room. Empty. Now, I know the obvious explanation is, maybe it was just a real person. And sure, sometimes that would be possible. But a lot of the time, it really couldn't have been. One side of our house had this tall brick wall between our yard and the neighbor's property, and there was a narrow path along it that wrapped around the house. That was usually the direction we'd see the figure walking. The problem was, that path was basically blocked off. There were sticks, scraps of wood, old boards, and random junk piled through there. You couldn't just casually walk through it. You'd have to climb over things, shove stuff aside, probably scrape yourself up, and make a ton of noise doing it. But when we saw the figure and ran outside to check, there was never anyone there. One sighting still sticks with me because it happened on one of the rare days it rained out in the high desert. We had this flower bed in front of a large bay window, though there weren't actually any flowers in it. That spot was one of the places the figure seemed to pass through all the time. The blinds were drawn that day, but the light coming in was bright enough that you could clearly see the shape of a person walking past the window. So I jumped up and went straight out the front door to follow. As usual, I found nothing. But then I noticed the ground. The desert soil was damp, and my own footprints were sharp and clear behind me. I could see exactly where I had stepped. But around that flower bed, where someone had supposedly just walked moments earlier, there were no other footprints. Not one. Then there was the night my sister had a sleepover. She and a few of her friends took over the living room, which meant it was officially off limits to us boys. As far as I knew, nothing strange happened that night, but my parents told it differently. They said they woke up to banging, girls talking, footsteps, and the sound of a whole living room full of teenagers getting loud. At first, they tried to ignore it. They wanted my sister to have fun, but after several minutes, my dad got fed up. It was the middle of the night, and their bed shared a wall with the living room, right where the TV stand was. So he got up, ready to tell them they'd had enough fun and needed to go to sleep. He opened the bedroom door, and the house was silent. The hallway was dark. No voices, no footsteps, no banging. He walked the short distance to the living room and looked in. The room was dark and quiet. The girls were all asleep, stretched out across the couches and floor. My parents said the noise continued right up until the second my dad opened the door. And the hallway was so short that there's no way those girls could have shut everything down, turned off the lights, and thrown themselves into convincing sleeping positions in the couple of seconds it took him to look in. The strangest part is, nobody else heard anything. Our bedroom also shared a wall with the living room, and I was always an extremely light sleeper. The smallest shuffle could wake me up. If there had really been that kind of noise, I absolutely would have heard it. But I heard nothing. So that's where I'll leave it for now. There were more things that happened in that house, a few that I still remember clearly, and probably some my parents could remind me of. But those moments were the ones that made the place feel less like a normal family home and more like somewhere we were quietly sharing with someone else. I think whatever this thing is, it knows I've been talking about it. And I don't think it likes that. The newest thing it started doing is mimicking my dogs. The other evening, I was inside the house when I heard something out in the yard that sounded almost like one of them. Almost, but not quite. It was warped somehow, like the sound had been copied badly and played back through something that didn't know what a dog was supposed to sound like. The second it happened, both of my dogs went absolutely frantic. They started barking, whining, crying, the whole thing. My younger dog kept racing between the back door and the big front window that looks out toward my parents' place, like he couldn't decide where the danger was coming from. And I know the dogs around here. I know their barks. I know which ones are deep, which ones are yappy, which ones echo from down the road. This wasn't any of them. There is one neighbor's dog that sometimes wanders into my yard, but she's tiny for her breed, and her bark is sharp and high-pitched. This wasn't her. This was coming from somewhere close, somewhere in my yard, and it sounded wrong. A couple nights later, I accidentally ended up sleeping at my boyfriend's apartment. I'd been sick and had slept through most of the day, then woke up around 5 in the morning, which is usually when I'm finally going to bed. I never really got back to sleep before my shift at 2 that afternoon. After work, I went over to my boyfriend's like I usually do. We grabbed food with one of his friends, hung out for a while, and after she left, we went into his room to watch something. My bed at home has been awful lately because I'm waiting on a new frame, and it's been messing up my back, so I was already hurting pretty badly. I guess I was more exhausted than I realized, because I fell asleep almost right away. When I woke up, it was around 4 in the morning. I decided to head home. The drive is only about 15 minutes, and honestly, everything seemed normal at first. I saw a possum near the edge of the road and a few rabbits sitting in someone's yard, but that's not too unusual around here. Then I pulled into my driveway. it was still completely dark. The sun wasn't even starting to come up yet. When my headlights swept across the front yard, I saw something huge crouched near the old stump where we cut down the holly bush. And it was watching me. I don't know how else to say it. It was hunched there, low and still, like it was trying to blend in with the stump. But it wasn't in the right spot. There aren't any decorations there, no plants, nothing it could reasonably be mistaken for. And whatever it was far too big to be any animal we normally get around here. We don't have bears. Nothing in this neighborhood is that size. So I did what I always do. I ignored it. I didn't look directly at it again. I didn't acknowledge it. I just pulled under the carport, got out of my car, and went inside like nothing had happened. But the whole neighborhood was silent. That's the part that really got to me. At that hour, the morning birds usually start up, and it had been warm, so there should have been frogs, crickets, something. But there was nothing. No sound at all. It felt like the whole area was holding its breath. I went through my normal routine as quickly as I could. I fed the dogs, fed the cats, checked what I needed to check. But the dogs were already on edge. My younger dog completely lost it. He barked and paced and would not settle down for almost 30 minutes. My older dog was even worse. He has started screaming whenever I go outside without him, and I mean screaming. It sounds horrible, like he's being hurt, even when he can see me clearly through the window. He won't stop until I come back in. And it's not just the dogs. My cats have been acting strange too. Out of nowhere, they'll stiffen up and stare out the windows. They don't even react like that to dogs. Feral cats have started gathering around my yard more often too, which feels strange because it's like all the animals know something is there. Everything about the animals has been off. The neighborhood dogs don't go out barking at night anymore. Usually there's always at least one dog making noise somewhere, but for weeks now, they've all been quiet after dark. I haven't done anything to invite this into my space. I don't want it here. I'm going to reach out to my best friend and have her help me make protection jars, and I'm going to bury one in each corner of the yard. Whatever this thing is, it is not welcome here. I deserve to feel safe in my own home. I have proof. Real proof. At least to me. I was incredibly close to my grandmother. She had fought cancer for a long time, and before she passed, I tried once to talk with her about the idea of communicating after death. I told her about a family friend who was a gifted gardener and how she always felt her late husband reached her through little changes in her plants. My grandmother was not really open to that conversation. She kind of brushed it away. And not long after that, she was gone. At the time, I worked in tech, so I was constantly on my computer. This was years ago, when I had just started a new job and had a newer iPhone and a Mac desktop. I did not have many photos on my phone, maybe 60 or so, and my screensaver was set to rotate through them. I knew every single picture by heart. I had moved out of state for that job, away from my grandmother, but I had gone home for the holidays shortly before she died. During that visit, I took a handful of photos with 3 generations of women in my family gathered around her. Those pictures became precious to me. After she passed, I looked at them all the time. A few weeks later, I woke up at around 3 in the morning because my computer suddenly lit up. It had been asleep. I lived in a studio apartment, so the glow filled the whole room and woke me right up. The screensaver was running, but something was strange. It was only showing pictures of my grandmother. Not just the photos from my phone either. It was pulling images from everywhere. Old folders, my hard drive, online albums. Every picture had her in it. And I knew. Immediately, I knew it was her. Of course she would choose my computer. That was my world. that was where she could reach me. Some photos lingered longer than others, cycling across the screen again and again, almost like she was choosing favorites. Then the slideshow reached the holiday pictures, the ones with the women in my family surrounding her. Those 5 photos repeated over and over. And then new pictures appeared. Pictures I had never taken. They looked like the moments between the original shots. Someone leaning forward laughing. Someone turning away from the camera to talk. Motion blur, shoulder shifting, faces changing. Little in-between seconds that should not have existed. But in every single one, my grandmother was still right in the center, looking straight at the camera. This went on for maybe half an hour. I just stood there, frozen, watching it happen. Eventually, my partner came over and asked what was going on. The second he got near me, the slideshow snapped back to the normal photos from my phone. He said I had been out of bed for so long that he was worried. I told him my grandmother had visited me. I told him everything I had just seen. He gently said I was grieving, and maybe I had been dreaming or sleepwalking. And then my computer fully woke up. The screensaver stopped, and a hard drive error popped up. It said there were 45 new files that could not be reconciled. They were newly created, but somehow backdated to the holiday visit, when the original 5 photos had been taken. I opened my photo library, and there they were. A whole grid of images. 5 rows. Each row started with one of the original holiday photos, followed by 9 new ones. All those impossible in-between moments I had just seen on the screen were now sitting there on my computer. I took a screenshot of the error. I took a screenshot of the photo grid. My mother even printed that grid later and had it put on pillows and blankets for the family, as a reminder that my grandmother was still with us, still watching over us in her own quiet way. For me, proof does not get much stronger than that. And after that night, my life became different. Stranger, honestly. I had always been sensitive, and I had experienced things here and there that I could never explain. But that visit felt like it opened something. Or maybe it simply erased the last bit of doubt I had. Since then, I have had many more encounters, not just with her, but with other spirits too. But she was the first one who came through clearly. And she came through the one place she knew I would notice. My screen. I can't say what happened to you, because I wasn't there. But I can tell you what happened to me years ago, and honestly, I still think about it. I was a teenager then, still living in the old apartment with my family. We moved out a couple of years ago, but back then we lived on the 10th floor, and everything started so suddenly. The first thing I remember was my desktop computer turning on by itself. I was in my room, bending down to pick up my phone charger, and the computer was behind me. I wasn't touching it. I wasn't even close to it, maybe 1.5 meters away. Then it just powered on. That scared me badly, and that was the beginning of everything. Nothing ever hurt us, thankfully, but it was still frightening. After that, kitchen cabinets started opening on their own. Not all the time, but enough that you couldn't just laugh it off. Then, a few weeks after my dog passed away, something else happened. I was home with my sister, Lena. She had gone down to the basement, so she wasn't even in the apartment. I was alone upstairs, watching TV. I got up from the couch to change the channel, and suddenly there was this loud bang from the kitchen. It shook me. I just froze there. After that, for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I started hearing scratching sounds at night from the kitchen floor, right where my dog used to sleep when he was alive. And the worst part is, the sound was exactly the same as the scratching he used to make. Years later, I found out my mother and Lena had heard it too, at the same time as me. They just didn't want to talk about it because it made them uncomfortable. There were other things too. One night, I felt this strange swirl of air brush against my feet. I don't really know how to describe it properly. It was like when people on ghost shows say they feel something touch them, or cold air move around them. That's the closest I can explain it. It felt deliberate, somehow. But the thing I remember most clearly, even now, was the shadow. One night, I woke up because I needed to use the bathroom. I shared a room with my sister, and she was still asleep. I could hear her snoring, and I could see her lying in her bed. Then I looked toward the balcony doors, and there was a shadow figure standing there. At that moment, my brain didn't really process it. I saw it, but somehow I didn't react the way you'd think someone would. I just went to the bathroom. When I came back, it was gone. It wasn't until the morning that it hit me properly. I had seen something standing in my room, right in front of the balcony. The strange part is, I didn't feel afraid when I saw it. Not in that moment. It was almost like my mind refused to understand what was happening until later. That ended up being the last experience I had. I don't know if that shadow was responsible for everything, or if there was more than one thing in that apartment. I really don't know. But personally, I've always felt like whatever it was wanted to be noticed. It wanted to be seen, heard, acknowledged. And I had been trying so hard to ignore everything. Maybe that's why it finally showed itself. After I saw it, everything stopped. I know some people won't believe me. Some people will say I imagined it or that I'm lying. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. And nobody can take that away from me. I really think your emotional state matters when you tell something to leave. That night, I was beyond angry. I do not even have the right words for it. I was so furious that my brain almost clicked into autopilot. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't careful. I was just done. And this is embarrassing, but my boyfriend Mason was laughing at me the whole time because I started throwing random little things around the room. Nothing dangerous, just small stuff nearby. I am lucky he finds my dramatic moments funny instead of alarming. At one point, I remember saying something ridiculous like, "Look at me, I'm throwing things. I'm a terrifying ghost now." Then I marched into the hallway and started opening and slamming doors. "Wow, so scary," I said. Doors opening and closing. Very impressive. Truly haunting behavior. By then, I was talking to the whole house like it had personally offended me, which, honestly, it had. I went back into the living room and said, "Do you see how stupid this looks? If you have something to say, then prove you have a brain and quietly write me a note. Otherwise, shut up and get out." Then I put a pen and a piece of paper on the table. Mason, still laughing, called out something like, "Yeah, you tell it." And no, it did not write me a note. Before that night, I had tried being polite. I had asked it to calm down. I had asked it to leave. We even tried sage once. But all of that came from this shaky, uncertain place. It felt like I was saying, "Please stop. Please listen. Look, I have sage now, so maybe this will work?" I didn't really believe myself then. But that night was different. I had hit a breaking point, and there was no question in my mind anymore. This was my home, my space. Whatever it was only there because I had allowed it to be there. I remember feeling like a parent scolding a child, and I think that is because, in my mind, it had started acting like one. It felt childish, needy, like it was doing things just to get attention. The thing that finally pushed me over the edge was how often it kept waking me up right as I was falling asleep. That was the part that got under my skin. I have a cat who will sprint into the bedroom and leap onto the bed when she wants breakfast. And for some reason, that is exactly where my brain went. Once I started thinking of this thing as an attention-seeking pet, I could not unsee it. I should also mention that I have experienced exploding head syndrome a few times. For me, it usually sounds like an extremely loud electric zack or arc, almost like static cracking right next to my head. Sometimes it is just one sharp pop. A couple of times I have heard voices too, though I suppose that could be interpreted in more than one way. These days, things are mostly quiet, but one thing still happens now and then. Maybe twice a month, the kitchen trash can lid ends up on the floor. We even started putting the lid on upside down so it sits inside the rim of the can, and somehow it still gets knocked off. It always happens during the day, and always when one of us is home. You know how, when two sound waves line up just right, they can make each other stronger? That's kind of how poltergeist activity has always felt to me. I don't mean that in a dramatic way. It's just that, in my experience, it seems to flare up more around younger people, especially teenagers, or around anyone carrying a lot of emotion under the surface. When it's happened around me, I was usually dealing with a lot internally. Not always showing it maybe, but definitely feeling it. There was this old place I used to spend time in, a little bar on the edge of town, and it had that kind of energy. Things would shift, noises would happen, people would feel watched. I've known a couple of bars like that, honestly. Places where it felt like the building already had something in it, and certain people just made it louder somehow. And I want to be really careful saying that, because I don't mean it's anyone's fault. I don't think it works like blame. It's more like a person can sometimes become an amplifier for whatever is already there. Strange, yes, but not something to feel guilty about. With paranormal things, it's easy for our minds to run off into the fog and start building castles out of guesses. And at the same time, it can feel cruel when someone immediately dismisses an experience as fake or ordinary. People can be harsh. If someone has been mocked enough, they can start doing that same mocking to themselves, turning doubt inward until it feels like proof. So I'm not here to tell you what your experience definitely is. It's yours. I believe you had it. I've had poltergeist activity happen around me too, but I do think it helps, when you can, to look at the experience from every angle. Keep room for the strange, sure, but also keep room for things like a draft, a loose shelf, a floorboard settling, or something simple hiding in plain sight. I've had enough paranormal experiences that I can't honestly say I know what's true. I'm not sure anyone really can, but I can say that I believe the paranormal is real. A while back, my sister, Marla, bought a house. She had worked hard to get there, and buying a house now is no small thing. It can feel almost impossible these days. I don't say that to make us sound fancy or anything. We're not. She went through a lot to reach that point. But that house was wrong from the beginning. There were dark presences in it, and there was also this very strong feeling of children being there. Not living children. Something else. The basement was empty when we started renovating. No boxes, no furniture, no little corners where something could be hidden. The house had been vacant for a while. And in that basement, there was this small, green plastic ball. At first, we didn't think much of it, but every time we came back, the ball would be somewhere else. Not rolled a little bit across the floor. Moved. Like it had been placed in a new spot. The childlike energy in that house was so strong that Marla and I finally decided to throw the ball away. It felt connected to whatever was making itself known. We tossed it out, and the trash was taken. Then we came back, and there was another green ball in the basement. Same kind, same color. We got rid of that one too. Then another one appeared. After the third one, it stopped. The balls stopped showing up, and that childlike presence quieted down a lot. It didn't vanish completely, but it wasn't so loud anymore. Months later, we found a green ball outside the house. Same type, but crushed. The others had already been taken away with the trash, so it wasn't like they had just rolled back. Now, could someone have been breaking into the house to play some long, weird prank? Sure. Stranger things have happened. But we checked. We set little tricks to see if anyone was getting inside while we were gone. Nothing. No signs of entry. No evidence of anyone coming or going. And honestly, when paranormal activity has been normal for both you and someone close to you, Occam's razor starts looking a little different. That house had a lot going on. More than just the green balls. So whatever is happening around you, I hope you're able to stay calm with it. That's helped me more than anything. A lot of paranormal things don't seem to need fear from us. Sometimes they're just there, moving through their own strange day, while we happen to be nearby. I've always been the kind of person who questions stories like this. I still do, honestly. I hear a lot of paranormal stories, and my first instinct is usually to look for the reasonable explanation. But there's one thing that happened to me when I was younger that I've never been able to explain. I was about 19 at the time, sitting alone at my buddy Darren's house, playing a skating game on his old PlayStation while I waited for another friend to finish his shift. We were supposed to go look at apartments afterward, so I was just killing time in the living room. While I was playing, the front door opened behind me. I could see it in the reflection of the TV. Someone walked in. The door shut, and I heard footsteps coming across the room, right behind the couch. It sounded completely normal, like somebody had just come home. I assumed it was my friend, so without turning around, I said, "What's up?" No answer. Then I heard the footsteps keep going, and a second later, his bedroom door slammed shut. That's when I looked at the clock and realized he wasn't supposed to be off work for almost 2 more hours. My first thought was that maybe he'd gotten fired or had some kind of bad day, so I got up and went to check on him. But there was nobody in the bedroom. There wasn't really anywhere to hide either. He had a mattress on the floor and barely any furniture. I checked the closet. Nothing. Then I started thinking maybe someone had come into the house who wasn't supposed to be there, so I checked the windows. Every one of them was closed and locked. I went through the whole house, confused and getting more uneasy by the second. And then it hit me. Nobody could have walked in, crossed that room, slammed that door, and disappeared. That was when I got genuinely scared. I left the house and walked straight to the fast food place where my friend was working. I told him what had happened, and that was the first time anyone told me the house had a reputation. He said he'd never experienced anything himself, but apparently it was part of the reason his mom had moved out and left him the place. She used to say that at night, while she was trying to sleep, she would feel fingers running through her hair, even though nobody was there. A few of our other friends had experienced small things in that house too, but nothing as clear as what happened to me. Nobody laughed when I told them. Nobody acted like it was some big joke. They were serious, and honestly, that made it feel even stranger. I stayed at the restaurant until my friend got off work, and after that, I never stayed in that house alone again. I'm not religious. I'm not superstitious. I've always thought of myself as pretty grounded and scientific-minded. But I also think there are things we just don't understand yet. I'm sure there's some explanation, but I've never found one that actually fits. An intruder is the only normal explanation I can even imagine. But where would they have gone? I checked everywhere. There was nowhere to hide. And the thing is, I wouldn't have searched the house like that if it had felt vague or dreamlike. It didn't. It was clear. I saw the reflection, heard the door, heard the footsteps, heard the bedroom door slam. It was real enough that I reacted like anyone would. Years later, after my friend had sold the house, I drove by out of curiosity. A family was living there then. They were all sitting outside in front of the house, not playing, not talking much, just sitting there, quiet, like they didn't want to be inside but had nowhere else to go. I still think about that sometimes. I'm going to take you back a little bit because this story really starts with my Nan. I was mostly raised by her. She was my safe place, really. Toward the end of her life, she came to stay with my mom and me in our little flat, and that's where she passed away. At home, with us. There's a lot of history behind that. I grew up with different kinds of neglect and abuse, and my mental health was already in a fragile place from a pretty young age. My mom had her own serious struggles with addiction and mental illness, so when my Nan died, I was left to grieve her almost completely on my own. One night, not long after she passed, I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, facing the window. I was absolutely broken. I looked up at the sky and said out loud, "I need you. Please, I just want to see you." I was begging into this huge, empty nothing. Eventually, I calmed myself down enough to sleep. And honestly, because very low nights weren't unusual for me back then, I sort of buried it and moved on. A few weeks later, I had another awful night. I don't remember calling out for my Nan that time, but I must have fallen asleep at some point because suddenly I was jolted awake by 3 clear knocks. Not vague noises, not the building settling. 3 distinct knocks. They came from the right-hand corner of my room, where the door to my little walk-in wardrobe met the bedroom door. I remember staring straight at the door, completely startled. But strangely, I didn't feel scared. I felt this beautiful rush of relief, like she'd come to me somehow, like she was letting me know I wasn't as alone as I thought. After that, I felt better, lighter somehow. Then the 3 knocks happened 2 more times. What really unsettled me was that they came at almost the same time each night, somewhere around 3:10 in the morning. So, of course, I started looking it up. I wanted to know what my Nan might have been trying to tell me. At first, I was excited. I honestly felt protected, like my own little guardian angel had found a way through. But then I read that 3 knocks can sometimes be seen as a mockery of the Holy Trinity. And that made my stomach drop, because my Nan was deeply religious. When I was little, I used to share a bed with her, and every single night I'd see her clasp her hands and whisper her prayers, without fail. That was who she was. So the idea that she would mock something sacred didn't feel right, not even slightly. Then I kept reading, which was probably not my finest idea, and I saw people saying that darker spirits can be drawn to people when they're vulnerable. And I started thinking about the nights I'd cried out, the nights I'd begged for someone to come. I wondered, did something hear me? Not her. Something else. For a while, I tried to push that thought away. I didn't want to give it power. But then one night, around the same time again, I woke up suddenly. My eyes just snapped open. And this time, there was no comfort. My whole body reacted before my brain did. My heart dropped, my stomach twisted, and I felt threatened. Completely threatened. I sat upright in bed and shouted, "Go away!" And after that, the knocking stopped. Years later, I moved out of that flat. I was 23, and for a while I sofa surfed and stayed briefly with my dad. Eventually, in 2018, I finally got my own space. It was a house share, but I was lucky. I lived with two kind, easygoing women, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. Around then, I started seeing someone. I'll call him Jay. He's actually the father of my children now. Back then, I was happy. Properly happy. I felt free. I thought of my Nan only with love, and I'd built a much healthier relationship with my faith. Then one night, Jay stayed over. Nothing unusual about that. We watched TV, fell asleep, and everything felt completely normal. But the next morning, I rolled over for those early relationship cuddles, and the look on his face stopped me cold. He looked terrified. Not half asleep, not confused, terrified. I asked him what was wrong, and at first he was quiet. Then he said, "I don't know. I think it was a dream." Obviously, that didn't calm me down. I kept asking, and eventually he said, "I don't think you want to know." Well, of course that made me want to know immediately. So he told me. He said, "I heard someone knock at the bedroom door, and it woke me up." I opened my eyes because I thought it might be one of the girls. Then I saw something. It was tall and dark, standing in the corner of your room behind the mirror. It walked out, went around the bottom of the bed, came up the left side, leaned over you, and said your name. I asked him what he did. He said he just closed his eyes because he thought it had to be a dream, and he was too frightened to move. But here's the thing. I had never told him about the 3 knocks. Never. And honestly, why would I? It's not exactly first date material, is it? By the way, during one of the worst periods of my life, I started hearing knocks in my bedroom at 3 in the morning. No thank you. So I just sat there for a moment, trying to absorb what he'd said. Then I asked him if he wanted to hear something strange. I told him the whole story, and he went white. Since that morning, I've never been disturbed by the knocks again. I do believe something came to me when I was weak, when I was calling out into the dark and desperate for comfort. I don't think it was my Nan. Not anymore. I also later found out that some people say you shouldn't sleep with mirrors facing your bed, so apparently I really did leave the spiritual front door on the latch there. But that's my experience with whatever else might be out there. These days, my mental health is much better managed. I'm stronger, more grounded, and much more resilient. My faith is still important to me, and I'm also deeply interested in spiritual things, but I don't feel helpless around them anymore. If I ever had to face something like that again, I genuinely believe I'd know how to stand my ground. So yes, that's my strange little glimpse into something I still can't fully explain. I still think about this night more than I probably should. This happened before COVID, around 2018 or 2019, so I was maybe 13 or 14. I grew up in western Pennsylvania, right near the edge of the Appalachian Mountains, so when I say certain places out there already have a strange feeling to them, I mean that in the most serious way. My uncle, Rick, lived about 5 minutes down the road from us. His house was big, kind of tucked away, with woods on one side and a field on the other. I had already had a few strange experiences there before, but this one is the one that stayed with me. My mom and I were house-sitting for him while he was away for work. He didn't have pets or anything, so it was just the two of us in this large, quiet house. That night, we were down in the basement watching a movie. The layout matters here. Across from the TV, the whole wall was basically windows, with French doors leading out to the back patio and pool. Since my uncle wasn't home, none of the outdoor lights were on, so beyond those doors it was completely black. Not dim, not shadowy, just black. We were sitting on this L-shaped couch with our backs to the windows. At some point, I heard this very specific sound. It was that hollow little tap you hear when someone knocks once on a big glass door. Just one knock. I sat up and looked over the back of the couch, but there was nothing there. Just darkness. I told myself maybe I had imagined it and went back to watching the movie. My mom didn't react at all, so I figured she hadn't heard it. Then it happened again. This time, when I looked back, I saw my dad standing outside. And I don't mean something that sort of looked like him. I mean it looked exactly like him. He was wearing his work hat and this old, faded gray Steelers crew neck he used to wear all the time. He was looking down at his phone, and the screen was lighting up his face and part of his chest. I could only see him from about mid-torso up. He wasn't moving. He wasn't knocking again. He was just standing there, staring down at his phone. I turned to my mom, completely confused, and said something like, "Dad's here." It was around 1:30 in the morning, so that already didn't make sense. My mom looked back at the doors and saw nothing. But I could still see him. Clear as day. She told me he was at home asleep and had work in the morning. I looked back toward the TV for a second, then turned around again, and he was still there. Same position, same clothes, still looking down at his phone. Still not moving. At that point, I wasn't even scared yet. I was more confused than anything. I told her again that he was outside and that we should let him in. I don't remember exactly what she said after that, but eventually I just turned back around and acted like I didn't see anything. I don't remember falling asleep, but somehow I did. The next morning, I called my dad and asked if he had come over the night before. He said no. But the strange part is, he didn't laugh it off. He said he believed me, and that he believed I really saw something. I told my uncle about it too, and asked him to check the cameras, but he never did, or at least he never told me what was on them. So I'm guessing he didn't really believe me. But I know what I saw. And whatever was standing outside those glass doors that night, it looked exactly like my dad. I've told this story before, and I always feel like I need to say up front that it isn't scary in a dramatic movie trailer kind of way. It's more unsettling, because even after all this time, I still don't have a clean answer for what happened. I'm not going to say exactly where it was, because the place has always been very firm about being officially not haunted. And honestly, I understand why. It was a living history museum, the kind of place where people come to see old buildings, demonstrations, crafts, schoolhouses, train rides, all of that. They already got enough ghost questions every year without me adding fuel to the little lantern. But despite the official line, there were stories. Plenty of them. Some were the kind you could shrug off. A lot of the buildings had employee-only areas, and most staff were in period clothing. So if someone said they saw a figure in an upstairs room or passing through a doorway, well, it might have just been someone working. Not every shadow gets to be a ghost. Other stories were harder to dismiss. I knew people who had seen or heard things themselves. One of the security supervisors, a guy I'll call Martin, had a few stories that made even the most practical employees go quiet. 2 guards under him apparently quit after experiences of their own. I also had one coworker who left after hearing too many stories, which sounds funny until you've worked in those old buildings after the guests thin out. Anyway, one summer day, I was working as a break person. That meant I rotated through a few buildings so the staff there could take lunch, bathroom breaks, or 15-minute breathers. One of my buildings that shift was the one-room schoolhouse. It was a quiet weekday. The kind of quiet where you can hear the old woods settle and suddenly become very aware of every little tick and creak. Most of the guests were off riding the train, on the boat, eating, or scattered somewhere else in the museum. So when I relieved the schoolhouse interpreter, I had about 30 minutes to myself. That summer, the schoolhouse was being used as a craft station. I don't remember the exact craft anymore, but I remember construction paper and glue sticks being involved. Lots of glue sticks. Now, I had been watching ghost hunting shows around that time, and I knew the schoolhouse was one of the buildings people whispered about. So, because apparently I had the self-preservation instincts of a wet paper bag, I started talking out loud. Not loudly. Just casually. I said something like, "All right, if you're here, knock over one of the glue sticks." I was standing near the front of the classroom, by the teacher's area. The entrance was at the opposite end of the room. At the front, there was a little raised platform, actually 2 levels, with a flag and chair on one part and the teacher's podium desk on the other. One thing about that building, a lot of the nails in that front section were these long, flat, old-fashioned nails. I only mention that because it matters. So I'm standing there, facing the teacher's podium, talking to the supposed ghost like a fool with a name tag. I look around. Nothing weird. Nothing on the floor. Nothing out of place. Then I turn around toward the entrance, partly to check the glue sticks and partly to see if any guests are coming in. No glue sticks have moved. Nobody's walking by. Nothing. I turn back around maybe 30 seconds later, and now there is a long, flat nail lying on the floor. Right there. It had not been there before. I know it hadn't. And the way it was positioned made absolutely no sense. The only place it could have come from, as far as I could tell, was the teacher's desk or the platform area. But I checked. Nothing looked missing. No loose spot. No obvious hole where a nail had just dropped out. It was just suddenly there, like the building had politely decided not to knock over a glue stick and instead offered me something much worse. I stopped talking after that. When my coworker came back, I didn't mention the ghost at all. I just showed her the nail and said, "Hey, I found this on the ground. I'm not sure where it came from." She looked just as confused as I felt. We agreed we'd tell either a supervisor or someone from maintenance, whoever we saw first. And that wasn't the only strange nail incident I had in that schoolhouse, but it's the only one I've never been able to explain away. The schoolhouse had a wood-burning stove, though it wasn't used anymore. It was just decorative by then, since the building had a modern heating system installed after it was moved to the museum. During December shifts, we'd often find little screws or nails sitting on top of the stove. Our best guess was that either guests were putting them there or maintenance was leaving them behind somehow. We always checked the stove at the start of the shift, and by halfway through the day, something would sometimes appear on it. That was odd, but not impossible. Later that same year, during a December shift, I found another long, flat nail in a weird place. This time it was sticking halfway out of one of the student desks. I always checked the desks at the start and end of a shift, mostly for things guests had left behind, or craft supplies that had gotten shoved inside. That month we were making ornaments, so there were always bits and pieces to clean up. But this nail wasn't just lying there. It was partly pulled out of the desk, like anyone had started removing it and then stopped. I don't know if maintenance had done it while cleaning before opening. Maybe they had. Maybe there's a perfectly ordinary explanation tucked away somewhere. But the coworker with me that day had been laughing earlier when I mentioned my little habit of checking for strange things in that building. After I found the nail, she stopped laughing. And not long after that, she quit. I used to leave my body when I was little. That's the simplest way I know how to say it, even though there's nothing simple about it. I would float up near the ceiling, kind of drifting in this slow figure-8 pattern above my parents while they talked downstairs or moved around the house at night. And the next morning, I'd tell them what they'd said. I'd tell them where they hid the cookies or which cabinet they'd tucked the chips into, little things I shouldn't have known. They'd just stare at me, completely confused, because there was no way I could have heard or seen any of it from my room. One night, I had an experience that stayed with me for the rest of my life. I left my body and found myself moving through this tunnel. When I came out the other side, I was in a dark, empty place. One side looked dead, like nothing could grow there, nothing could breathe there. But farther away, across what looked like a bridge, everything seemed alive. Not just alive, but pulsing with life. Then I was told, very clearly, that I wasn't supposed to be there. And just like that, I was pulled back through the tunnel and into my house. But I was still out of my body. I started looking for my family, but nobody was inside. Then I realized they were all outside dealing with the animals, because part of the fence had come down on the farm. Behind the barn, I saw one of our horses caught in the wire. I tried to tell my mother. I was right there near her, trying to get her attention, but she couldn't see me. She couldn't hear me. I remember feeling this awful helplessness, like I was shouting underwater. So I went back into the house, laid back into my body, and woke up. I ran straight to the door, but it was locked. I pounded on it until my mother came inside. I told her about the horse, and she asked me how I knew. So I told her everything. I told her I left my body. I told her that was how I knew what happened at night, how I knew where things were hidden, how I knew conversations I shouldn't have heard. She looked stunned. Then she told me never to talk about it again. Later, when I was older and living in a different house, I started hearing my name being called in my mother's voice, loud and clear. But she wasn't there. And it wasn't just me. Friends heard it. Roommates heard it. They'd look up and say, "Did your mom just call you?" But it wasn't her. Other things happened too. I felt my feet get pulled hard while I was in bed. I felt someone press down beside me, like they were sitting on the mattress. My grandmother, my roommate, and a couple of friends all saw what looked like a person walking up the front path toward the house. But no one was there. There was nowhere for that person to go either. It was right in front of a big picture window, not even 10 feet away. One moment they were walking up, and the next, nothing. In the early 70s, I had an experience that felt like some kind of download. It came through as automatic writing, and it looked like binary code. At the time, I didn't even really know what I was looking at. Years later, when I saw binary code for the first time and understood what it was, I screamed. There was a message attached to that experience too, but I don't share it. I don't have proof. I don't have a witness. And honestly, some things feel too heavy to hand over casually. My family had their own experiences. My grandparents and my mother, who was pregnant at the time, saw a UFO in the mountains of Pennsylvania in the mid-60s. They were driving near a ridge when this object appeared and just hung there in the trees in front of them for several minutes. Because of where they were on the crest of the road, it was almost level with them. My grandfather contacted authorities he knew, and apparently other people had reported seeing it too. I didn't find out about that until I was around 19. They never talked about it. These were serious, practical people, not the kind who went looking for attention or strange stories. My grandmother had something happen too. In the middle of the day, a person came to her and asked her to go to a certain mountain and say a specific prayer so he could go home. She was told never to reveal his name or who he was. She did what he asked. Even on her deathbed, she wouldn't tell me his name. She wouldn't say what he looked like or what he wore. She kept that promise all the way to the end. And these are just a few things. I could keep going. I know how all of this sounds. Believe me, I do. I spent about 15 years refusing to think about any of it because it felt impossible. It felt crazy. It felt easier to lock it all away and live like none of it happened. But it did happen. I have no reason to make it up. I have a family. I have a successful business. I live a normal life in every visible way. I'm just trying to understand what has been going on. So if anyone else has experienced anything similar, you can message me. Or if you want to hear more, I can tell more. Because at this point, I'm tired of pretending the strange parts of my life were never real. I want to tell this the way I remember it, because for a long time, I tried to explain it away. For more than 10 years, my family saw things in our house. Shadow figures mostly. They didn't start right when we moved in either. We had already been living there for about 4 or 5 years before anything really began happening. At first, my husband, Daniel, was the one who saw them. Then my 2 kids started seeing them too. One of them described a man who looked completely black, like a shadow, but shaped clearly like a person. He wore what looked like an old-fashioned hat and a dark suit, and he would stand in the doorway of their room, just staring. There were other things too. Some looked like shadowy shapes with eyes or teeth. Some had no face at all. I kept telling myself they were dreams, or fear, or kids' imaginations running wild. Then one night, I saw one too. My younger son, Noah, was about 10 at the time. He's older now, but I still remember that night so clearly. He was sitting beside me on my bed, and the kitchen light was on behind the doorway to my room. Suddenly, I saw what looked like a child standing there. Not a flat shadow on the wall. It was standing there, 3-dimensional, right in the doorway. It looked like a small child made entirely of darkness. I couldn't see a face. I thought it might have been wearing a little shirt, but the strangest part was the light behind it. The kitchen light should have touched it somehow, should have shown something, but it didn't. The light just seemed to stop around it. I blinked, and it was gone. For a second, I was ready to tell myself it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. But then Noah jumped beside me. He started crying, completely terrified, and he was staring at the same doorway. I asked him, "Did you just see a shadow that looked like a kid?" He couldn't even answer out loud. He just nodded. That was the moment everything changed for me. We had both seen the same thing. I immediately started praying over us, over the room, over the house. I prayed for protection, for God's presence, for anything evil to leave. We didn't see anything else that night, but we also didn't sleep. We left the lights on and stayed in that bed until morning. The next day, I told Daniel what had happened. He had slept in the living room that night because his back was bothering him, and when I told him, he admitted he had been seeing that childlike shadow and other figures in the house for a while. He just hadn't told me. Around that same time, I found out something else. Daniel had been having hallucinations for years, even before we were together. I knew he had always had strange experiences, things he described as spiritual or supernatural, but I didn't know how much he had kept hidden. Later, he was diagnosed with schizoaffective bipolar disorder, and he also lived with CPTSD. But that still didn't explain what happened to me and Noah. It didn't explain why more than one person saw the same things. And honestly, that was what shook me. Before that night, I had been quietly dismissing what my family was saying because I hadn't seen it myself. Once I did, I had to rethink everything I believed about mental health, spiritual warfare, and the paranormal. I do believe some hallucinations are the brain misfiring. I really do. But I also believe there can be something spiritual behind certain experiences, especially when more than one person is seeing or hearing the same thing. For years, it continued. Daniel would see people or creatures standing around the house or running through rooms. Sometimes he heard whispering. Sometimes he could understand it. Sometimes he couldn't. When he could, the things being said were awful. My son began struggling too. He was seeing and hearing things, and at one point, the voices were telling him to hurt himself. He did try to take his life, but thank God he survived. He's okay now, and I don't say that lightly. I'm grateful every day. We tried so many things to get peace back into our home. I recommitted myself to Jesus. I prayed protection over the house. I prayed out loud. I played worship music during the day and listened to the Bible at night. I memorized scripture and spoke it when I felt afraid. A lot of the time, it helped. But it didn't always feel permanent, especially when we kept bringing dark things back into the house through what we watched or listened to. That's what I believe now. I think certain things can open doors spiritually, even if we don't mean for them to. Eventually, it got bad enough that we asked a Catholic priest to come bless the house. He prayed, read scripture, and blessed the rooms, especially the beds. About a week later, some Carities ministers came and prayed through the house too. I truly believe those prayers helped. I would tell anyone dealing with something like this to stay proactive. Don't erase. That part matters more than people realize. Isolation can become dangerous, especially when someone is already struggling mentally or spiritually. You need prayer, support, community, and people who will take you seriously without feeding fear. Daniel passed away last year. Since then, the house has felt different, much quieter. I hardly sense anything now. He had told me before that he believed dark things had attached themselves to him because of things that happened to him earlier in life. He felt like they thought they owned him, but they didn't. We also stopped watching and listening to the darker stuff. I know not everyone will agree with me, but I believe scary movies, dark music, occult content, and even just being curious can invite things in. I've noticed it in my own life. Anytime I start digging into creepy or spiritually dark things, the fear and heaviness seem to come back. Could someone say it was imagination? Sure. I understand why people would think that. But too many things happened that more than one person witnessed. Too many moments lined up. Too many times someone else saw what I saw before either of us said a word. And for anyone who says these things are just spirit guides, I don't believe that. I believe they're deceptive spirits. I believe they pretend to be harmless or helpful or mysterious, but they are not. When I sense something now, I speak out loud. I tell it to leave in Jesus' name. That has worked for me. But I also believe you have to actually trust the name you're using. It isn't a magic phrase. It's faith. I'm sharing this because when it was happening, I tried to research shadow figures and couldn't find much that helped me. Maybe hearing our story will help someone else feel less alone. This is only my family's experience, and it's my honest opinion. Take it for what it is. I want to tell you a story my father used to tell, about a weekend he spent with his closest friend Marlon back around the early 90s. They were both musicians at the time, and because they each had young families, finding peace and quiet to actually write music was almost impossible. There was always noise, always someone needing something, always life tapping them on the shoulder. So they came up with what seemed like a perfect idea: rent a little cottage somewhere remote, bring their keyboards and recording gear, and spend the whole weekend writing songs. They ended up finding this old stone miner's cottage near Minehead in England. It was tucked away in the countryside, very pretty in that lonely sort of way. Hardly any cars passed by. There weren't really any neighbors close enough to notice, and the whole place looked peaceful from the outside. But the moment my father stepped through the door, he felt something was wrong. At the time, both he and Marlon were involved in spiritual mediumship, so they were used to picking up on odd atmospheres. And this place had one. My father always described it as heavy, cold, and unfriendly, almost like the cottage itself didn't want them there. Still, they had already paid for the weekend, so they tried to brush it off. They set up their keyboards in the front room and got to work. The cottage itself was simple: a small wooden front door, a kitchen at the back with another door leading into a little garden, and upstairs there were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. For the first part of the night, nothing dramatic happened, just small things. A glass of water that seemed to empty itself without explanation. That thick, unpleasant feeling in the air getting worse. The kind of silence that doesn't feel quiet, but watchful. Then, while they were sitting downstairs talking through a piece of music, there were 2 loud bangs on the front door. My father thought it might be the elderly woman who owned the place, since she lived a little way up the road. So he went to answer it. Nobody was there. Just darkness, fields, and the stillness of the countryside. He came back inside, and a few minutes later, the banging started again. This time, both of them rushed to the door and opened it quickly. Again, nothing. And then, almost straight away, the same banging came from the back door. Marlon grabbed a flashlight and ran through the kitchen into the garden. But there was no one there either. No footsteps. No figure running off. Nothing that could explain it. That went on for a while. Front door, back door, silence. Then more banging. By then, neither of them felt brave. They packed away what they could, decided the music could wait, and went upstairs to try to sleep. My father took a book to bed because he wanted to calm himself down. He managed to drift into a light sleep sometime around 1 in the morning. Then he woke up to Marlon screaming. Not shouting, screaming. The kind of scream that makes your body move before your mind catches up. My father ran into his room and found him curled up in the corner, shaking. Marlon said he had woken to see a large, rough-looking man climbing into the bed with him. They searched the entire cottage, every room, every cupboard, behind every door. There was no one there. Marlon was badly shaken, so my father said he'd stay in the room with him for the rest of the night. And because my father always tried to cut tension with humor, he made a silly joke. Something like, "Maybe the ghost just likes you and wanted a cuddle." The moment he said it, Marlon's heavy walking boots lifted from across the room and flew straight at my father, hitting him on the head. That was enough. They both went downstairs and stayed there until morning, not sleeping properly, just waiting for daylight to arrive. The next day, before leaving, they told the owner what had happened. She seemed genuinely surprised and said she had never heard of that cottage being haunted. Apparently, she owned another property nearby, and that one was known for strange activity. Which is funny because the following year, my parents actually rented the same miner's cottage for a family holiday. And nothing happened. No banging doors, no flying boots, no shadowy man in the bedroom. Just a quiet little cottage in the countryside. But my father never forgot that first weekend. To him, it always felt like the place had made its point very clearly. It wasn't in the mood for music,